Hey there, welcome to Brad Arrows. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these stories give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Nathan MacLeod possessed a rare gift with wounded creatures. The former military medic could calm the most traumatized animals at his Highland Wildlife Sanctuary with nothing more than a whisper and the gentle touch of his weathered hands. The locals whispered that he had inherited the ancient gift of the Highland animal healers, though Nathan himself dismissed such tales as mere folklore. Nestled in the misty valleys near Loch Ness, where ancient pines whispered secrets to the fog, and the wind carried tales of creatures both mundane and mythical, his sanctuary had become a haven for Scotland's most troubled wildlife. The 5 acres of rugged terrain, dotted with specialized enclosures and rehabilitation spaces, had given Nathan purpose after his return from Nepal. Each animal within its boundaries carried scars both visible and hidden, much like their caretaker. When the first painful lump appeared on his palm, after rescuing an injured snow leopard from an illegal exotic animal trader, Nathan dismissed it as a simple infection. The magnificent cat had been part of a larger seizure that included several species he'd never encountered before, many showing signs of experimental medical procedures. 2 weeks later, as the swelling beneath his skin began to move like a serpent through Highland heather, the pain became unbearable. The strange markings that appeared along the path of the swelling reminded him of symbols he'd once seen carved into remote Himalayan temples. But he pushed the thought away, focusing instead on his daily rounds. When the skin finally broke open in Dr. Sinclair's examination room, revealing what had been growing inside him, her horrified gasp made his blood run cold. This was no ordinary infection, and it would connect him to a past he'd spent years trying to forget in the shadow of the world's highest mountains. The small town of Glenmorrow wasn't marked on tourist maps. Tucked away in the highlands where the mountains embraced the misty lochs, it was the kind of place travelers passed through on their way to better-known destinations. But for Nathan MacLeod, the forgotten town had become home, a place where his own brokenness blended with the ancient, wounded landscape. At 42, Nathan carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who'd seen too much. His sanctuary, Second Chance Highland Wildlife Trust, occupied a piece of land he'd purchased with his military pension and whatever remained of his family's modest inheritance. The locals called him the Beast Whisperer, though few understood what drove a decorated combat medic to devote his life to abandoned and injured wildlife. His small cottage sat at the property's edge, its stone walls weathered by centuries of highland storms. The interior remained sparse and functional, like the military field hospitals he'd once called home. The only personal touches were photographs. Nathan in uniform with his unit in Nepal, Nathan with his brother Ian at their mother's funeral, Nathan kneeling beside Kasha, the snow leopard who had become his first success story after returning to Scotland. Nathan MacLeod possessed a rare gift with wounded creatures. The former military medic could calm the most traumatized animals at his Highland Wildlife Sanctuary with nothing more than a whisper and the gentle touch of his weathered hands. The locals whispered that he had inherited the ancient gift of the Highland animal healers, though Nathan himself dismissed such tales as mere folklore. Nestled in the misty valleys near Loch Ness, where ancient pines whispered secrets to the fog, and the wind carried tales of creatures both mundane and mythical, his sanctuary had become a haven for Scotland's most troubled wildlife. The 5 acres of rugged terrain, dotted with specialized enclosures and rehabilitation spaces, had given Nathan purpose after his return from Nepal. Each animal within its boundaries carried scars both visible and hidden, much like their caretaker. When the first painful lump appeared on his palm, after rescuing an injured snow leopard from an illegal exotic animal trader, Nathan dismissed it as a simple infection. The magnificent cat had been part of a larger seizure that included several species he'd never encountered before, many showing signs of experimental medical procedures. 2 weeks later, as the swelling beneath his skin began to move like a serpent through highland heather, the pain became unbearable. The strange markings that appeared along the path of the swelling reminded him of symbols he'd once seen carved into remote Himalayan temples. But he pushed the thought away, focusing instead on his daily rounds. When the skin finally broke open in Dr. Sinclair's examination room, revealing what had been growing inside him, her horrified gasp made his blood run cold. This was no ordinary infection, and it would connect him to a past he'd spent years trying to forget in the shadow of the world's highest mountains. The small town of Glenmorrow wasn't marked on tourist maps. Tucked away in the highlands, where the mountains embraced the misty lochs, it was the kind of place travelers passed through on their way to better-known destinations. But for Nathan MacLeod, the forgotten town had become home, a place where his own brokenness blended with the ancient, wounded landscape. At 42, Nathan carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who'd seen too much. His sanctuary, Second Chance Highland Wildlife Trust, occupied a piece of land he'd purchased with his military pension and whatever remained of his family's modest inheritance. The locals called him the Beast Whisperer, though few understood what drove a decorated combat medic to devote his life to abandoned and injured wildlife. His small cottage sat at the property's edge, its stone walls weathered by centuries of highland storms. The interior remained sparse and functional, like the military field hospitals he'd once called home. The only personal touches were photographs. Nathan in uniform with his unit in Nepal, Nathan with his brother Ian at their mother's funeral, Nathan kneeling beside Kasha, the snow leopard who had become his first success story after returning to Scotland. Dr. Emma Sinclair had served the Glenmorrow community for 23 years. At 52, her once golden hair had silvered like the Highland mist, and experience had etched fine lines around her keen green eyes. She'd watched Nathan arrive 4 years ago, hollow-eyed and haunted, recognizing in him the 1,000-yard stare of someone running from memories. As the town's only doctor, she'd treated his occasional injuries, but never the wounds that ran deepest. Nathan's brother Ian MacLeod, who had kept their grandmother's maiden name, lived 3 hours away in Edinburgh. The brothers spoke rarely. Where Nathan had chosen service in the military, Ian had pursued wealth in pharmaceutical research. Their paths had diverged so completely that few in Glenmorrow even knew Nathan had a brother, much less one who served as research director at Highland Pharmaceutical Solutions. The sanctuary was struggling. Bills piled up on Nathan's worn oak table. Veterinary invoices, feed costs, property taxes marked with final notices in angry red letters. The upcoming charity fundraiser wasn't just important, it was essential. Without it, Nathan would lose everything: the animals, the sanctuary, and the purpose that kept his own demons at bay. The day that changed everything had been unseasonably cold, even for a Scottish spring. Nathan received a call before dawn from Inspector Robert MacDougall about an abandoned property near the old monastery ruins. Got a tip about some exotic animals, Robert had said, his voice grave. Might be something illegal. Thought you'd want to be there. Nathan arrived as the pale sun struggled to pierce the morning mist, casting ghostly shadows across the dilapidated stone building. The smell hit him first, the unmistakable stench of neglect and suffering. Inspector MacDougall stood by his police vehicle, his weathered face grim beneath his cap. Owner vanished 3 days ago. Local gamekeeper finally called it in, Robert explained, nodding toward the crumbling structure. It's bad in there, Nathan. Nathan MacLeod possessed a rare gift with wounded creatures. The former military medic could calm the most traumatized animals at his Highland Wildlife Sanctuary with nothing more than a whisper and the gentle touch of his weathered hands. The locals whispered that he had inherited the ancient gift of the Highland animal healers, though Nathan himself dismissed such tales as mere folklore. Nestled in the misty valleys near Loch Ness, where ancient pines whispered secrets to the fog, and the wind carried tales of creatures both mundane and mythical, his sanctuary had become a haven for Scotland's most troubled wildlife. The 5 acres of rugged terrain, dotted with specialized enclosures and rehabilitation spaces, had given Nathan purpose after his return from Nepal. Each animal within its boundaries carried scars both visible and hidden, much like their caretaker. When the first painful lump appeared on his palm, after rescuing an injured snow leopard from an illegal exotic animal trader, Nathan dismissed it as a simple infection. The magnificent cat had been part of a larger seizure that included several species he'd never encountered before, many showing signs of experimental medical procedures. 2 weeks later, as the swelling beneath his skin began to move like a serpent through Highland heather, the pain became unbearable. The strange markings that appeared along the path of the swelling reminded him of symbols he'd once seen carved into remote Himalayan temples. But he pushed the thought away, focusing instead on his daily rounds. When the skin finally broke open in Dr. Sinclair's examination room, revealing what had been growing inside him, her horrified gasp made his blood run cold. This was no ordinary infection, and it would connect him to a past he'd spent years trying to forget in the shadow of the world's highest mountains. The small town of Glenmorrow wasn't marked on tourist maps. Tucked away in the highlands, where the mountains embraced the misty lochs, it was the kind of place travelers passed through on their way to better-known destinations. But for Nathan MacLeod, the forgotten town had become home, a place where his own brokenness blended with the ancient, wounded landscape. At 42, Nathan carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who'd seen too much. His sanctuary, Second Chance Highland Wildlife Trust, occupied a piece of land he'd purchased with his military pension and whatever remained of his family's modest inheritance. The locals called him the Beast Whisperer, though few understood what drove a decorated combat medic to devote his life to abandoned and injured wildlife. His small cottage sat at the property's edge, its stone walls weathered by centuries of highland storms. The interior remained sparse and functional, like the military field hospitals he'd once called home. The only personal touches were photographs. Nathan in uniform with his unit in Nepal, Nathan with his brother Ian at their mother's funeral, Nathan kneeling beside Kasha, the snow leopard who had become his first success story after returning to Scotland. Dr. Emma Sinclair had served the Glenmorrow community for 23 years. At 52, her once golden hair had silvered like the Highland mist, and experience had etched fine lines around her keen green eyes. She'd watched Nathan arrive 4 years ago, hollow-eyed and haunted, recognizing in him the 1,000-yard stare of someone running from memories. As the town's only doctor, she'd treated his occasional injuries, but never the wounds that ran deepest. Nathan's brother Ian MacLeod, who had kept their grandmother's maiden name, lived 3 hours away in Edinburgh. The brothers spoke rarely. Where Nathan had chosen service in the military, Ian had pursued wealth in pharmaceutical research. Their paths had diverged so completely that few in Glenmorrow even knew Nathan had a brother, much less one who served as research director at Highland Pharmaceutical Solutions. The sanctuary was struggling. Bills piled up on Nathan's worn oak table. Veterinary invoices, feed costs, property taxes marked with final notices in angry red letters. The upcoming charity fundraiser wasn't just important, it was essential. Without it, Nathan would lose everything: the animals, the sanctuary, and the purpose that kept his own demons at bay. The day that changed everything had been unseasonably cold, even for a Scottish spring. Nathan received a call before dawn from Inspector Robert MacDougall about an abandoned property near the old monastery ruins. Got a tip about some exotic animals, Robert had said, his voice grave. Might be something illegal. Thought you'd want to be there. Nathan arrived as the pale sun struggled to pierce the morning mist, casting ghostly shadows across the dilapidated stone building. The smell hit him first, the unmistakable stench of neglect and suffering. Inspector MacDougall stood by his police vehicle, his weathered face grim beneath his cap. Owner vanished 3 days ago. Local gamekeeper finally called it in, Robert explained, nodding toward the crumbling structure. It's bad in there, Nathan. It was worse than bad. In what had once been the building's cellar, they found a makeshift laboratory. Steel cages lined the damp stone walls, housing creatures that had no business being in the Scottish Highlands. A red panda, emaciated and trembling, huddled in one corner. Several rare mountain wolves, their fur matted and dull, paced in spaces too small for their powerful frames. In the dimness of the cellar's furthest reaches, Nathan discovered something that made his blood run cold: a juvenile snow leopard, its magnificent coat marred by strange, surgical scars. "Sweet Jesus," Nathan muttered, pulling on his gloves. He worked methodically, as he had on battlefields, triaging the animals most in need. The snow leopard, a female with unusually pale eyes, growled weakly as Nathan approached. "I know, lass," Nathan whispered, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "You've every right not to trust me." He knelt, extending his hand palm up in a non-threatening gesture. The leopard sniffed cautiously, then licked his palm, leaving a wet streak across his skin. Later, Nathan would wonder if that moment, that simple connection between two wounded souls, was when the parasite transferred. By afternoon, all 9 animals had been loaded into Nathan's modified transport vehicle. The snow leopard, whom Nathan had named Aurora, lay sedated on a thermal blanket, her wounds cleaned and bandaged. Nathan's hands were filthy, scratched in several places from handling terrified animals. He washed them perfunctorily at an outdoor tap, the icy highland water numbing his skin. The first sign appeared 3 days later, a small red bump on his palm where Aurora had licked him. Nathan barely noticed it, accustomed to minor injuries in his line of work. By the 5th day, the bump had grown tender, with a distinct raised track extending toward his wrist. The mark seemed to shimmer in certain lights, like the iridescent patterns he'd once seen painted on temple walls in remote Himalayan villages. Probably just an infected scratch, he told Kasha, who watched him with ancient eyes as he made his evening rounds. The snow leopard rumbled deep in her throat, as if sensing something her human friend couldn't yet comprehend. Nathan applied antibiotic ointment and wrapped his hand, more concerned with Aurora's recovery than his own discomfort. The rescued leopard had responded well to treatment, her eyes showing the first spark of trust when Nathan approached her quarantine enclosure. A week after the rescue, the pain intensified. The red line had extended past his wrist, tracing a path up his forearm in a pattern that reminded Nathan of the sacred symbols he'd seen carved into prayer wheels in Nepal. At night, he could swear he felt movement beneath his skin, a crawling sensation that left him sweating and nauseated in his small cottage, the wind howling outside like a creature in pain. Still, he hesitated to seek help. The sanctuary fundraiser was just 9 days away, and every moment was precious, calling potential donors, preparing the property for visitors, training the healthier animals for the rehabilitation demonstration that always loosened checkbooks. His hand could wait. Dr. Sinclair's waiting room was mercifully empty when Nathan arrived. He cradled his bandaged hand against his chest, the throbbing pain now radiating up his entire arm. The morning mist had given way to a heavy rain, drumming against the clinic's windows like impatient fingers. The elderly receptionist took one look at his ashen face and immediately ushered him into an examination room. Dr. Emma Sinclair entered moments later, her practiced professional smile faltering when she unwrapped his hand. "How long has it been like this?" she asked, gently probing the inflamed skin. "About 2 weeks since it started," Nathan admitted, wincing as she touched a particularly tender spot. "Got bad the last few days." She frowned, examining the snaking red line that now extended halfway up his forearm. "And you're just coming in now." Nathan shifted uncomfortably. "Been busy with the sanctuary. The fundraisers this weekend, Doctor." Sinclair's expression hardened slightly. "I understand your dedication, but this isn't something to ignore." She made notes in his chart, then looked up with narrowed eyes. Have you been taking any medication recently for pain or anxiety? Nathan stiffened, recognizing the tone, the careful neutrality medical professionals adopted when they suspected a patient of drug-seeking behavior or psychological issues. His military records had followed him to Glenmorrow, complete with the PTSD diagnosis that often made doctors wary. "This isn't in my head, Emma," he said firmly. "Something's wrong with my hand, doctor." Sinclair had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I need to consider all possibilities. Your history of trauma has nothing to do with whatever's in my hand," Nathan interrupted. "I can feel it moving." Skepticism flickered across her face, but she nodded. "I'll order blood work and start you on broad-spectrum antibiotics. It's likely a bacterial infection, possibly from one of your rescue animals. We should also consider an ultrasound to check for abscesses." Nathan left the office with a prescription and the distinct feeling he hadn't been taken seriously. The crawling sensation intensified on the drive home, as if whatever was beneath his skin had been agitated by the examination. The rain had intensified, turning the highland roads into treacherous ribbons of mud and standing water. Inspector MacDougall was waiting by the sanctuary gate when Nathan returned, the older man leaning against his police vehicle, his dark uniform nearly black with rain. "Checking up on those new arrivals," Robert explained, straightening as Nathan approached. His eyes narrowed when he noticed Nathan's bandaged hand. "What happened there?" Nathan hesitated, then decided honesty might serve him better than doctor. Sinclair's skepticism. "Not sure. Got some kind of infection after that rescue last week." Robert gestured for Nathan to show him. When Nathan unwrapped the bandage, the inspector let out a low whistle. "Christ almighty, that's no ordinary infection. Reminds me of something I saw years back when I was stationed in India with the Royal Marines." "That's what I was thinking," Nathan said, relief flooding through him at being taken seriously. "Doctor, Sinclair thinks I'm imagining things." Robert's weathered face creased with concern. "Emma's a good doctor, but she hasn't seen what we have. Some things you don't find in medical textbooks." He studied the red track more closely. "There's a pattern to this. See how it curves and doubles back. Almost like writing." Nathan looked more carefully. Robert was right. The inflammation didn't follow a random path. It curved and looped in an almost deliberate way. "When I was in Nepal," Nathan said quietly, "local monks talked about parasites that left marks like ancient texts. I thought they were just stories." Robert's expression darkened. "Maybe you should call your brother. He works with tropical diseases, doesn't he? At that fancy research place in Edinburgh." Nathan nodded slowly, the thought of calling Ian leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. Their last conversation had ended with Ian suggesting Nathan's animal sanctuary was just another symptom of his savior complex. "I'll think about it," Nathan said finally. That night, unable to sleep from the pain, Nathan photographed his arm and sent the images to Ian with a terse message. "Need your professional opinion. Medical issue." The response came faster than expected. A phone call just after midnight. "How long has this been developing?" Ian asked without preamble, his voice clipped and professional. "About 2 weeks. Getting worse daily. And you were in contact with recently imported animals." "Yes." rescue from an illegal exotic animal situation. A long pause. You need to see a specialist, Nathan. Not your local GP. Is it what I think it is? Parasitic infection, another pause. Possibly, but the pattern is unusual. Where exactly did these animals come from? Don't know. Owner vanished. Why? Because that pattern resembles something I've seen in my research. Something that shouldn't be in Scotland. Ian's voice had lost its professional detachment, replaced by genuine concern. I can have a car there tomorrow to bring you to our facility. Nathan's suspicion flared. Your facility, so I can be another research subject. So you can get proper treatment, Ian snapped. This isn't the time for your anti-establishment paranoia, Nathan. The familiar argument might have continued, but a sudden shooting pain caused Nathan to drop the phone. The center of his palm, where the infection had started, had begun to bulge outward, the skin stretching thin. By the time he retrieved the phone, Ian had hung up. Nathan stared at his hand in horror. Something was definitely moving beneath the skin, pressing upward as if trying to break through. He made two decisions that night. First, he would not call his brother back. Second, he would find answers on his own. If Dr. Sinclair wouldn't take him seriously, and Ian only saw him as a potential research opportunity, he would have to look elsewhere. The next morning, Nathan drove not to Dr. Sinclair's office, but to the small veterinary clinic where Dr. Fiona Mackenzie worked. If anyone understood parasites and their behaviors, it would be a veterinarian who specialized in exotic animals. What he didn't realize was that his brother had already made calls of his own calls that would bring the past. Nathan had been running from straight to his door in Glenmorrow. Dr. Mackenzie's clinic occupied a converted stone cottage on the edge of town, its slate roof gleaming wet in the morning light. The waiting room, usually filled with the sounds of barking dogs and mewing cats, was quiet when Nathan arrived just after opening. Only old Mrs. Campbell sat in the corner, an ancient Scottish wildcat dozing in a carrier at her feet. Nathan MacLeod, the elderly woman, acknowledged with a nod. You look like death warmed over, lad. Nathan attempted a smile that came out as a grimace. The pain had intensified overnight, and he'd barely slept. The receptionist, a university student named Sophie, who volunteered weekends at the sanctuary, looked up from her computer. Her eyes widened at Nathan's appearance, the pallor of his skin, the sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air, the way he cradled his bandaged arm. Dr. Mackenzie is with a patient, but I'll tell her you're here, Sophie said, already reaching for the phone. Nathan sank into a chair, exhaustion washing over him. The clinic's walls were covered with educational posters, domestic animal parasites, wildlife diseases, vaccination schedules. His gaze landed on a diagram of tapeworm life cycles, the cartoon illustration showing larvae migrating beneath a dog's skin. The similarity to his condition made his stomach turn. Fiona appeared minutes later, still wearing surgical scrubs from her previous appointment. At 36, she carried herself with the confident efficiency of someone who'd found their calling early and pursued it relentlessly. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her expression shifting from professional concern to personal worry when she saw Nathan. Exam room 3, she said simply, holding the door open. Inside the small examination room, Nathan unwrapped his hand with clumsy movements. The bandage stuck to the weeping wound in his palm, and he bit back a curse as it pulled away, revealing inflamed skin stretched taut over a visible bulge. Fiona inhaled sharply. How long? 2 weeks since it started. Getting worse fast. She donned gloves and gently examined his hand, tracing the red line that now extended nearly to his shoulder. You've seen Dr. Sinclair yesterday. She thinks it's a bacterial infection. Or that I'm making it up, Nathan added, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. Fiona's lips pressed into a thin line. This isn't bacterial. She looked up, meeting his eyes directly. This is parasitic, but I've never seen a migration pattern this aggressive in any species, let alone a human. Relief at being taken seriously mingled with dread at the confirmation. Can you treat it? I can try, but this is outside my usual scope. Animal parasites don't typically cause this severe a reaction in humans. She gently turned his hand, studying the pattern of the inflammation. The migration pattern is unusual too, almost deliberate. Inspector MacDougall said the same thing. Fiona nodded thoughtfully. Most parasitic larvae create random meandering tracks. This looks organized somehow. She reached for a digital camera on the counter. May I? After photographing his arm from several angles, Fiona sat at the small desk and pulled up the images on her computer. I want to consult with a colleague, a parasitologist at Edinburgh University. Meanwhile, I can give you some antiparasitic medication we use for exotic animals. It's not approved for humans, but the active ingredient is the same as what Dr. Sinclair would prescribe if she recognized this correctly. Thank you, Nathan said, the words inadequate for his gratitude. As Fiona prepared the medication, Nathan's mind drifted back to Nepal, to the monastery where his unit had been stationed during what was supposed to be a routine medical mission. The memory came in fragments, the thin mountain air, the suspicious looks from the older monks, the younger ones who gradually warmed to the Western medics, and then the boy, Tenzin, with the strange marks spiraling up his leg. What's this from? Nathan had asked the monastery's elderly healer. Naga's writing, the old man had answered, his eyes full of ancient knowledge. The serpent beneath the skin speaks of old sins. The boy had been in agony, the parasite traveling faster than anything the Western doctors had seen before. Within days, it had reached his bloodstream, and the boy's suffering had ended only with his death. The official report cited an unknown tropical infection, but the monastery's healer had whispered something else, something about parasites that chose their hosts, that carried messages from the ancient world to the modern one. Nathan, Fiona's voice pulled him back to the present. You still with me? He blinked, realizing he'd been lost in the memory. Sorry, just remembered something from my time overseas. Fiona handed him a small bottle of pills. Take 2 now, then 1 every 12 hours. They'll make you nauseated, but they should slow the parasite down. She hesitated. But Nathan, you need to see a specialist. This is beyond what either Dr. Sinclair or I can fully treat. My brother works in tropical disease research, Nathan admitted reluctantly. He offered to help. Fiona's eyebrows rose. I didn't know you had a brother. We're not close. The understatement hung in the air between them. "Well, now might be the time to get closer," she said pragmatically, "because whatever's in your arm needs expert attention." Nathan nodded, swallowing the pills with a paper cup of water. "The fundraiser's tomorrow. I can't cancel it. The sanctuary won't survive." Fiona's expression softened. "I'll help with the fundraiser. Sophie and I can manage the demonstrations. But promise me you'll call your brother after." "I promise," Nathan lied, knowing he had no intention of reaching out to Ian again. As Nathan drove back to the sanctuary, his phone rang, an unknown Edinburgh number. He answered on speakerphone, his bandaged hand throbbing too painfully to hold the device. "Mr. McLeod, this is Dr. Margaret Winters from Highland Pharmaceutical Solutions. Your brother asked me to contact you regarding your condition." Nathan's jaw tightened. "I don't need Highland Pharma's help. I understand your hesitation, Doctor," Winters replied, her voice measured. "But we've been tracking several similar cases across Scotland and northern England. All individuals working with recently imported exotic animals, all presenting with the same unusual migration patterns." Nathan pulled over suddenly alert, the morning mist swirling around his parked vehicle. "There are others with the same infection. 5 confirmed cases so far. 2 of them former military who served in Nepal, like yourself." The implication sent a chill through Nathan's body that had nothing to do with his fever. "This isn't a coincidence. We don't believe so, no." A pause. "Mr. McLeod, your military service record indicates you were stationed at the Dhaulagiri Monastery in 2017 during Operation Mountain Light." The official name of their supposedly humanitarian mission struck Nathan like a physical blow. His unit had been told they were providing medical aid to remote monasteries. Only later did they discover the mission's dual purpose: cataloging local biological resources for pharmaceutical research. "How do you know about that?" "Those records are classified. Highland Pharma was a contractor for certain aspects of that operation, Doctor." Winters replied carefully. "Your brother wasn't aware of your involvement until yesterday when he saw your symptoms." Nathan's mind raced. The angry phone call from Ian made more sense now. Not just brotherly concern, but professional alarm. "What aren't you telling me, Doctor?" Winters, another pause. "We believe these parasitic infections may be targeted, specifically affecting individuals with prior exposure to the Dhaulagiri region." Targeted. How? By whom? That's what we're trying to determine, which is why we need to examine you as soon as possible. Nathan ended the call without responding, his thoughts in turmoil. If Dr. Winters was right, this wasn't just a random infection from handling rescue animals. It was connected to his past, to the mission that had left him with nightmares and a medical discharge. Back at the sanctuary, Nathan found an unexpected visitor waiting. Inspector Mac Dougal leaned against his police vehicle, cap in hand, expression grim. "Got a call from your brother," Robert said without preamble. "Says you're in danger. Asked me to bring you to Edinburgh." Nathan's laugh was harsh. "Since when does my brother talk to local law enforcement?" "Since he found out there's been another case." Robert's weathered face was deadly serious. "Man over in Aberdeen. Animal rescue worker, just like you. Former military, just like you. Found dead this morning. parasite reached his bloodstream. The news hit Nathan like a physical blow. Who was he? Name's Thomas Morrison. Served in Nepal 2016 to 2018. Ring any bells? Nathan sagged against his truck, suddenly lightheaded. He was in my unit. We called him Silent Tom. Best wilderness medic I ever worked with. Robert nodded grimly. And now he's dead from the same thing that's crawling up your arm. Before Nathan could respond, a sharp pain lanced through his hand. So intense, he cried out. The center of his palm, where the infection had started, bulged visibly, the skin stretching paper-thin. To his horror, something dark pressed against it from within, something trying to break through. Mother of God, Robert breathed, staring at Nathan's hand. What in heaven's name is that? Nathan couldn't answer, overwhelmed by pain and the terrifying sensation of movement beneath his skin. Memories flashed through his mind. Tenzin's agonized face as the parasite traveled through his small body. The monastery healer's warnings. Morrison kneeling beside the dying boy with helpless frustration. We need to get you to a hospital, Robert insisted, already opening his police vehicle's door. No, Nathan gasped through clenched teeth. Not yet. There's something I need to check first. Despite Robert's protests, Nathan staggered to his cottage. Inside, he fumbled through his desk drawer until he found what he was looking for, a battered journal from his time in Nepal. He'd kept meticulous notes on all their medical cases, including Tenzin's. With trembling fingers, he flipped through the pages until he found the entry, accompanied by a crude sketch of the inflammation pattern on the boy's leg. Beside it, Nathan had written the monastery healer's words. The Naga writes in the flesh of those who disturb ancient places. When he held the journal beside his own infected arm, the similarity was undeniable. The same unusual pattern, the same deliberate curves and loops. It's the same, Nathan whispered. Exactly the same. Robert looked over his shoulder, face pale. What does it mean? I don't know. But Morrison would have recognized it too. He was there when Tenzin died. Nathan's mind raced. Someone's recreating what happened in Nepal. Someone who knows about Operation Mountain Light. Your brother, Nathan shook his head. Ian's many things, but he wouldn't. He broke off as another wave of pain shot through his arm. We need to find out who imported those animals. Nathan managed through gritted teeth. The ones from the abandoned building. Robert was already on his phone, calling the station. After a brief conversation, he hung up, expression troubled. Animals came through a broker in London. Company called Global Exotic Imports. Can you run the name? See who owns it. While Robert made more calls, Nathan researched the company on his laptop, fighting through waves of pain and nausea. The medication Fiona had given him seemed to slow the parasite's progress, but the bulge in his palm continued to grow. The skin now stretched to translucency. Got something, Robert announced finally. Global Exotic Imports is a subsidiary of Himalayan Pharmaceuticals. Nathan's blood ran cold. Himalayan Pharmaceuticals had been Highland Pharma's main competitor for government contracts during Operation Mountain Light. They'd lost out to Highland and blamed it on inside information provided by someone in Nathan's unit. They think we sabotaged them, Nathan said slowly. They think we stole their research in Nepal and gave it to Highland. His eyes widened with sudden understanding. And now they're getting revenge. Not just revenge, Robert added grimly, showing Nathan his phone screen. Look who's listed as their chief research consultant. The name made Nathan's heart stop. Dr. Edmund Blackthorne. The temple researcher, Nathan whispered. He was there in Nepal, studying local parasites for what he claimed was anthropological research. But he was really, another wave of pain cut him off. This one so intense his vision blacked out momentarily. We need to call your brother, Robert insisted. If anyone can help make sense of this, before Nathan could argue, his phone rang. It was Fiona Mackenzie. Nathan, I sent those photos to my colleague at Edinburgh University, she said without preamble. He recognized the pattern immediately. It's a modified form of a Himalayan bloodworm, but it's been altered somehow to specifically target human hosts. Altered how? Nathan managed through the pain. He's not sure, but he says it's not natural. Someone engineered this parasite to be more aggressive, to create specific migration patterns. The confirmation of his suspicions sent a wave of cold fear through Nathan's body. Fiona, I need you to cancel tomorrow's fundraiser. Tell everyone it's postponed due to a health emergency. Nathan, please. It's not safe, he hesitated. I think someone used those rescue animals to deliberately infect me, and they might try again with anyone connected to the sanctuary. After ending the call, Nathan turned to Robert, his decision made. I need to go to Edinburgh, not just for treatment. I need to talk to Ian about what really happened in Nepal. Robert nodded grimly. I'll drive you. But first, let's get that hand properly bandaged. Whatever's trying to break through, I'd rather it stay contained until we get you to experts. As they drove away from the sanctuary, Nathan looked back at the place that had been his refuge and purpose for the past 4 years. He couldn't shake the feeling that he might never see it again, that the past he'd been running from had finally caught up with him, burrowing beneath his skin like the parasite slowly working its way toward his heart. The drive to Edinburgh took just over 3 hours, but to Nathan, each minute stretched into an eternity of pulsing pain. Robert maintained a grim silence, pushing his police vehicle well beyond the speed limit, lights flashing to clear their path through the misty Highland roads. Twice they had to stop for Nathan to vomit by the roadside, a side effect of the medication or the advancing infection. He couldn't tell which. By the time they reached the outskirts of Edinburgh, the bulge in Nathan's palm had grown to the size of a coin. The skin stretched so thin it appeared translucent. The red track had extended past his shoulder, creeping toward his collarbone in the same deliberate pattern. Through the fog of pain, he watched the ancient city emerge from the morning mist, its castle looming above like a silent guardian. Highland Pharmaceutical Solutions occupied a renovated Victorian building in the heart of the city's research district. The lobby was a stark contrast to Nathan's rustic sanctuary, all polished stone and gleaming steel, with tasteful displays highlighting the company's contributions to tropical disease research. The receptionist took one look at Nathan's ashen face and Inspector MacDougall's uniform before making a hurried call. Minutes later, Ian MacLeod emerged from an elevator, his usual immaculate appearance disrupted by signs of stress. Loosened tie, rumpled shirt, dark circles beneath his eyes. The brothers hadn't seen each other in over a year, and the contrast between them had never been starker Ian in his tailored suit, Nathan pale and sweating in his work clothes, cradling his infected arm. "Christ, Nathan," Ian breathed, shock evident in his voice. Without hesitation, he approached his brother, medical concern overriding their personal estrangement. "How bad is the pain?" "Manageable," Nathan lied through gritted teeth. Ian's expression made it clear he wasn't fooled. "Dr. Winters is waiting upstairs. We've prepared an isolation room." He glanced at Inspector MacDougall. "Thank you for bringing him. I can take it from here." Robert stood his ground. "I'll be staying with him." Something passed between the men and assessment, a grudging respect. Ian nodded once. "As you wish." This way. The elevator ascended to the 5th floor. Not the executive suites Nathan had expected, but a clinical research area with restricted access. Ian swiped his badge, leading them down a sterile corridor to a room that more closely resembled a hospital suite than a corporate office. Dr. Margaret Winters awaited them, already in protective gear, her face grave behind her mask. "Mr. McLeod, I'm glad you're here," she said, her calm professionalism at odds with the alarm that flashed across her face when she saw his arm. "We need to examine that immediately." What followed was a blur of activity nurses appearing to take vital signs and blood samples. Dr. Winters gently unwrapping his makeshift bandage, Ian watching from the corner, his face unreadable. When the bandage came away, the room fell silent. The bulge in Nathan's palm had developed a small dark opening at its center, a pinprick breach where the skin had finally given way. "It's starting to emerge, Doctor," Winters said quietly. She turned to a nurse. "Prepare for extraction and get Dr. Ransom up here. He has experience with parasitic infections." As the medical team bustled around him, Nathan fixed his gaze on his brother. "You knew," he said, his voice low. "You knew this might happen someday." Ian approached the bedside, careful not to interfere with the medical preparations. "I suspected something like this was possible, yes. After what happened in Nepal." "What exactly did happen in Nepal?" Inspector MacDougall interrupted, his hand resting instinctively on his holstered weapon. "Because it seems to me a lot of people are paying a high price for whatever went down there." Before Ian could answer, a commotion erupted in the hallway, raised voices, the thud of footsteps. The door burst open to reveal 2 security guards restraining a disheveled man in his 60s. His wild eyes locked on Nathan. "That's him," the man shouted, struggling against his captors. "McLeod, you remember me." "Dr. Edmund Blackthorne, Himalayan Pharmaceuticals. You destroyed my life's work." Nathan recoiled, recognition dawning. Blackthorne had been present in Nepal, ostensibly studying local parasites for potential pharmaceutical applications. Nathan's unit had encountered him several times in villages near the monastery. "Get him out of here," Ian ordered sharply. "Your brother ruined me," Blackthorne continued, his face contorted with rage. "Your company stole my research, and now you're doing it again." As the guards dragged Blackthorne away, Nathan turned to Ian, questions forming on his lips. But at that moment, a searing pain shot through his hand so intense that a cry tore from his throat. On the bed, his infected hand convulsed, the small opening in his palm widening as something pushed through from beneath. "Hold him, Doctor," Winters commanded, rushing forward with instruments. Nathan felt hands restraining him as doctor. Winters bent over his palm. The sensation was indescribable pressure and movement, a slithering beneath his skin, and then a sudden release as something emerged from the wound. "Got it, doctor," Winters said, her voice tight with concentration. With delicate precision, she extracted a thin, pale worm approximately 2 inches long, placing it immediately into a specimen container. "Himalayan bloodworm," she confirmed, studying the parasite. "But modified somehow. It's larger than normal, and the head structure is unusual." The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Nathan sagged against the pillows, the excruciating pressure suddenly absent. But his respite was short-lived. "Doctor," Winters's expression remained grave as she examined his arm. "This was just the primary parasite," she explained. "The tracks on your arm indicate secondary migration. There are likely more larvae moving through your tissue." The implication hit Nathan like a physical blow. "More? How many, doctor?" Winters exchanged a glance with Ian. "Based on the pattern and your symptoms, possibly dozens. We need to start aggressive antiparasitic treatment immediately." While nurses prepared IV medications, Nathan turned to his brother. "Blackthorn said I stole his research." "What was he talking about?" Ian sighed, pulling a chair close to the bed. "Edmund Blackthorn was developing a treatment for parasitic infections using modified bloodworms. The parasites were engineered to seek out specific tissue types, delivering medication directly to infected areas. Revolutionary concept, but highly experimental and dangerous," Nathan added, remembering Tenzin's suffering. "Yes, his early trials in Nepal went badly wrong. The modified parasites became more aggressive, not less. When your unit reported the deaths, Himalayan Pharmaceuticals lost their government funding." Ian paused. Highland received the contract instead. The pieces clicked into place in Nathan's mind. "Blackthorn thinks I sabotaged him, that I reported his failed trials to help you. He's become obsessed with the idea. After losing the contract, he was fired from Himalayan Pharma. He disappeared for years." Ian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it momentarily transported Nathan back to their childhood. 3 months ago, he resurfaced as a consultant for Global Exotic Imports, the company that supplied the animals to the abandoned building, Nathan said, connecting the final dots. "He used them to infect me and Morrison, and potentially others," Inspector MacDougall added grimly. "How many more infected animals are out there, doctor?" Winters returned with an older colleague, Dr. Ransom, a parasitologist with deep creases around his eyes, and steady hands that spoke of decades of experience. After examining Nathan and conferring quietly with Dr. Winters, he addressed the room. "We need to perform an immediate procedure to remove the migrating larvae," he explained. "The pattern indicates they're moving with purpose toward major blood vessels. If they enter your bloodstream, the consequences would be catastrophic." "Like with Morrison," Nathan said quietly. "Dr. Ransom nodded solemnly. "We'll use ultrasound to locate each parasite and extract them surgically. It's delicate work, but we've successfully treated 2 other victims this way." "And if it doesn't work?" Nathan asked, already knowing the answer from Tenzin's fate. "Let's focus on the procedure," doctor. Ransom replied diplomatically. As the medical team prepared for surgery, Ian drew Nathan aside. "There's something else you should know," he said, his voice low. "The fundraiser at your sanctuary, it's still happening." Nathan stared at his brother in confusion. "I told Fiona to cancel it." "She tried, but someone, presumably Blackthorn, called all your donors and told them it was moved up a day, not canceled. People are gathering there right now." Horror washed over Nathan. "He's going to infect them too. Everyone who supports the sanctuary." "I've already called Police Scotland," Ian assured him. "They're sending a team." "But Nathan," he hesitated, "the procedure will take hours. You won't be able to warn them yourself." Nathan struggled to sit up, fighting against the pain and the sedatives already entering his system through the IV. "I need to call Fiona, Aurora." All the animals, Ian's voice was uncharacteristically gentle. "You have to make a choice. We can delay the procedure so you can make calls, try to warn people. But every minute increases the risk of the parasites reaching your bloodstream." The cruel dilemma struck Nathan with full force. His sanctuary, the purpose that had saved him after his discharge, the animals that depended on him, the community that had finally begun to accept him, or his own life. "Give me a phone," Nathan said finally. 5 minutes, then do whatever you need to do." Ian handed over his mobile without argument. Nathan called Fiona first, his words tumbling out urgently. When she didn't answer, he tried the sanctuary's landline, then Robert's deputy. Each call went unanswered, increasing his desperation. Finally, he reached Sophie, the young receptionist. "Sophie, listen carefully," he began, only to be interrupted by the sounds of a crowd in the background. "Nathan, where are you? Everyone's here for the fundraiser." It's amazing so many donors came early. His heart sank. "Sophie, you need to shut it down now." "Get everyone out." "What?" "I can barely hear you." "Doctor, Blackthorn is about to start his presentation on Himalayan parasites. He brought some amazing specimens for the education booth. Blackthorn is there." Cold fear clutched at Nathan's heart. "Sophie, he's dangerous. Get everyone out, call the police." But the connection had deteriorated, Sophie's confused response lost in static. "Time's up, doctor," Ransom said firmly, nodding to the anesthesiologist. "We need to begin." As the sedative flowed into his veins, Nathan locked eyes with his brother. "Save them," he whispered, the words slurring. "If I don't make it, save the sanctuary. Save Aurora." The last thing Nathan saw before darkness claimed him was Ian's nod, a promise between brothers that transcended years of estrangement. Then there was only blackness, and beneath it, the terrifying sensation of something moving beneath his skin, burrowing ever deeper toward his heart. Nathan drifted through layers of consciousness, fragments of conversation penetrating the darkness. "Doctor," Winters' clinical voice reporting parasite locations. "Doctor." Ransom's calm instructions to surgical assistants. Ian's tense phone calls arranging emergency responses to the sanctuary situation. The steady beep of monitors tracking his vital signs. Time lost meaning as Nathan floated in and out of awareness. In his more lucid moments, pain defined his existence, sharp surgical intrusions, as each parasite was located and extracted. Dull throbs from incisions scattered across his arm and shoulder, burning sensations, as aggressive medications flowed through his veins. In his less lucid moments, memories entangled with hallucinations. He was back in Nepal, kneeling beside Tenzin as the boy convulsed in agony. He was at the sanctuary, watching helplessly as his animals writhed with parasites beneath their skin. He was a child again, Ian standing protectively between him and their father's rage. "We've extracted 23 larvae so far, Doctor." Winters's voice penetrated the fog, but the ultrasound shows at least 4 more, including one dangerously close to the subclavian vein. "If that one breaches the vessel wall, Doctor." Ransom left the sentence unfinished. "His body temperature is rising," a nurse reported. 104 degrees and climbing. "Push more antipyretics, Doctor." Winters ordered, and increased the antiparasitic drip. Nathan tried to speak, to ask about the sanctuary, but his lips wouldn't cooperate. The weight of sedation pulled him back into darkness. When Nathan finally regained full consciousness, weak daylight filtered through Edinburgh's perpetual mist outside his hospital window. He lay in a private room, his left arm heavily bandaged from fingertips to shoulder, multiple IV lines running into his right arm. The simple act of turning his head required monumental effort. Ian sat in a chair beside the bed, his suit replaced by casual clothes, his usual clean-shaven appearance marred by several days' stubble. He stared at a tablet computer, deep circles beneath his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept. "The sanctuary," Nathan managed, his voice a raspy whisper. Ian's head snapped up. "You're awake." Relief washed over his features, quickly replaced by carefully controlled professional concern. "How's the pain? Tell me about the sanctuary," Nathan insisted, ignoring the question. Ian set aside the tablet and leaned forward, elbows on knees. Police Scotland got there in time to shut down the event. Blackthorn had already set up an educational display with parasite specimens. Some were suspiciously damaged containers cracked as if designed to expose guests to the contents. Was anyone infected? 3 people reported suspicious skin reactions. "They're being treated prophylactically." Ian paused. "We caught it early, Nathan. Nothing like what happened to you or Morrison." Nathan closed his eyes briefly, relief mingling with exhaustion. "And Blackthorn in custody. Inspector Mac Dougal's team arrested him at the sanctuary. He's facing multiple charges: bioterrorism, attempted murder, actual murder in Morrison's case." The next question was harder to ask. The animals. Something flickered across Ian's face: hesitation, perhaps even guilt. "That's more complicated. Doctor, Mackenzie is caring for them temporarily, but the sanctuary itself." He looked away. "The Health Protection Scotland has quarantined the property. They're concerned about parasite contamination." The implications crashed over Nathan like a physical wave. For how long? Minimum 30 days, possibly longer depending on what they find. Ian met his brother's gaze directly. "I'm sorry, Nathan. They're being thorough because of the public health risk." Nathan struggled to sit up, ignoring the stabbing pain the movement caused. The animals can't stay in temporary housing for a month. They need their habitats, their routines. Aurora alone requires, Nathan. Ian's voice was firm as he gently pressed his brother back against the pillows. "You need to focus on recovery right now. Doctor." Ransom removed 27 parasites from your arm and shoulder. 3 had already reached muscle tissue. 1 was millimeters from a major blood vessel. I almost died, Nathan stated flatly. Yes, the single word carried the weight of all that remained unspoken between the brothers. Nathan looked down at his bandaged arm. How bad is the damage? Ian's hesitation told Nathan everything before he spoke. The extractions were invasive. There's significant tissue damage, particularly in your hand and forearm. Will I regain function? Some, certainly. Full recovery is, Ian trailed off. Unlikely, Nathan finished for him. The reality settled over him like a highland mist. His left hand, his dominant hand, would never be the same. The careful work of tending injured animals, of performing delicate medical procedures, of building and repairing enclosures, all compromised, perhaps permanently. There are excellent occupational therapists, Ian began, slipping into problem-solving mode. Rehabilitation options, adaptive equipment. Stop, Nathan's voice cracked. Just stop. Silence fell between them, filled only by the steady beep of monitoring equipment and the distant sounds of hospital activity. After several minutes, Nathan spoke again. Tell me about Aurora. The question seemed to catch Ian off guard. The snow leopard, she's special. Nathan couldn't articulate the importance of the magnificent cat. How her trust had been the first healing thing he'd experienced after returning from Nepal. How her progress from traumatized victim to confident survivor had mirrored his own slow recovery. Ian's expression softened slightly. She's refusing food from Dr. Mackenzie. Apparently, she's quite selective about human interaction. Despite everything, Nathan felt a small smile tug at his lips. She's always been a good judge of character. The moment of lightness faded quickly as reality reasserted itself. The sanctuary was quarantined. His arm was potentially permanently damaged. Morrison was dead, and the animals that depended on him faced an uncertain future. What happens now? Nathan asked, the question encompassing everything: his health, the sanctuary, the criminal case against Blackthorn, his fractured relationship with his brother. Ian ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Legally, Blackthorn will be prosecuted. His actions were clearly premeditated, the evidence overwhelming. And the sanctuary, he hesitated. Financially, it's in trouble, Nathan. The quarantine, the canceled fundraiser. Ian paused. Your medical bills. I have insurance, Nathan said weakly. Basic coverage through the NHS. Ian gestured to the private hospital room, the specialized equipment, the team of experts who had saved his life. This goes far beyond what that will cover. The full weight of the situation crashed down on Nathan. Not only had he nearly died, not only was his arm potentially permanently damaged, but the sanctuary, his purpose, his redemption after Nepal, might be lost as well. So that's it, Nathan's voice was hollow. Blackthorn wins after all. The animals will be euthanized or shipped off to facilities that don't understand their needs. The property will be sold to cover medical bills, and I'll be. Nathan couldn't finish the sentence. The future, suddenly, a gaping void. Ian stood abruptly, pacing the small room. That's not going to happen. You can't just throw money at this and make it go away, Nathan said bitterly, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. This isn't a corporate problem you can solve with Highland Pharma's resources. Actually, it is. Ian stopped pacing, facing his brother directly. Highland Pharmaceuticals bears responsibility here. Blackthorn was targeting us as much as he was targeting you. His vendetta began because we received the contract he lost. So what Highland's offering isn't charity, it's liability. What exactly is Highland offering? A research partnership with your sanctuary. Ian's eyes lit up with an intensity Nathan hadn't seen since they were boys planning adventures in the Highlands. We would provide funding for comprehensive medical treatment of all affected animals, plus ongoing financial support for the sanctuary itself. Nathan's suspicion flared. And my animals would be lab rats. No, Ian's response was immediate and firm. They would receive the best possible veterinary care, while our researchers simply observe and document their recovery. No invasive procedures, no experiments, just observation and care, and the sanctuary itself would be fully restored and upgraded. The proposal includes funding for expanded habitats, better security systems, and additional staff. Ian produced a document folder from his briefcase. It's all outlined here. Nathan accepted the folder with his good hand, but didn't open it. This feels too convenient. What's the catch? The catch, came a familiar voice from the doorway, is that you'd have to work with me. Doctor. Fiona Mackenzie stood there, looking exhausted but determined. Highlands offered me a position as head veterinarian for the new research program. If you'll have me. Nathan looked between Fiona and his brother, seeing for the first time how the pieces might fit together. A research partnership. The modified parasites Blackthorn created represent both a threat and an opportunity, Ian explained. Understanding how they target specific hosts could help develop better treatments for parasitic diseases worldwide. And who better to oversee the program than someone who understands both the medical and emotional needs of recovering animals? With this, Nathan held up his damaged hand, fingers trembling with the effort. So you adapt, Fiona said firmly. Hire assistants for the physical work. Focus on training, supervision, protocol development. Your value isn't in your hand, Nathan. It's in your heart. From the doorway, Inspector MacDougall cleared his throat. For what it's worth, I think they're right. Those animals need you, damaged hand or not. Nathan sat in silence, weighing the proposal against his limited options. The sanctuary was quarantined, his medical bills mounting, his physical capabilities compromised. Without help, he would lose everything. Yet accepting Highland's offer meant partnering with the corporate world he'd always distrusted. It meant working with Ian, navigating their complicated relationship alongside professional collaboration. Aurora, Nathan said finally. I need to see her first. Before I decide. Ian nodded, understanding the significance of the request. I'll arrange it. Dr. Winters thinks you're stable enough for a brief supervised visit to the sanctuary. He hesitated, then added, whatever you decide, I'll support you. Not as Highland's research director, but as your brother. The simple statement, so long overdue, cracked something in Nathan's carefully maintained defenses. For the first time since Nepal, perhaps since their parents' deaths had torn them apart as teenagers, he allowed himself to believe that his brother might truly be on his side. Tomorrow, Nathan said, decision made. Take me to see Aurora tomorrow. 3 months later, Nathan stood at the edge of the newly expanded snow leopard enclosure. watching as Aurora navigated the complex system of climbing platforms and enrichment features. The magnificent cat moved with the fluid grace that had been absent during his first post-hospital visit to the sanctuary, when she had been listless and withdrawn, refusing food from anyone but Nathan. "She's doing well," Fiona observed, joining Nathan at the observation area. "Her weight's back up to normal, and she's showing natural hunting behaviors with the environmental enrichment programs." Nathan nodded, a smile tugging at his lips as Aurora paused in her explorations to fix him with her pale gaze, rumbling deep in her throat. "She's telling me she approves of the renovations, but thinks the hunting simulation is still too easy." Fiona laughed. "I'll have Dr. Reynolds make it more challenging then." The mention of James Reynolds, the big cat specialist Highland had hired as part of the sanctuary's expanded staff, reminded Nathan how much had changed in the 3 months since his return to Glenmorrow. The sanctuary had transformed from his private refuge into the Highland Wildlife Research and Rehabilitation Center, complete with state-of-the-art veterinary facilities, expanded habitats, and a team of specialists working alongside the local volunteers who had always supported Nathan's mission. The partnership with Highland had moved forward with surprising smoothness. Ian had been true to his word about the terms. The animals received excellent care. The research was observational and non-invasive, and Nathan maintained final authority over all sanctuary operations. The infected animals had been successfully treated rather than euthanized, becoming the first cohort in a groundbreaking study on parasitic disease recovery in exotic species. Nathan's own recovery had been more complicated. 3 surgeries and intense physical therapy had restored partial function to his hand, but the damage was permanent. He could manage basic tasks, driving, eating, simple animal handling. But the fine motor control needed for medical procedures or detailed work remained beyond his capabilities. Some days the frustration overwhelmed him, sending him into dark moods that even Aurora's presence couldn't dispel. But he had learned to adapt, to focus on what he could do rather than what he had lost. His experience had become an unexpected asset in working with traumatized animals. They seemed to sense in him a kindred spirit, someone who understood what it meant to heal from deep wounds. "The school group will be here at 11, Fiona reminded him gently, recognizing the shadow that crossed his face as he flexed his damaged hand. "Do you want me to take them, or are you up for it?" Nathan pulled himself back from the edge of self-pity. "I'll do it. The kids are always more interested in the battle scars anyway." This was true. The local school children who visited the sanctuary found Nathan's scarred arm fascinating, especially when he connected it to the sanctuary's educational mission about wildlife protection and conservation. "Dr. McLeod," Sophie's voice interrupted his thoughts. Nathan turned to find the young woman, no longer just a receptionist, but now the sanctuary's community outreach coordinator, approaching with a tablet computer. "Your brother's on video call from Edinburgh." Nathan nodded, taking the tablet with his good hand. "Thanks, Sophie. I'll take it in the office." The office was another new addition, a comfortable space overlooking the central compound. Ian's face appeared on the screen, the corporate backdrop of his Highland office, a stark contrast to the nature-oriented space Nathan occupied. "Morning, little brother," Ian greeted him. "Still wearing that ridiculous ranger hat in 40-degree weather, I see." Nathan smiled, touching the brim of his wide-brimmed hat. "Some of us work in the real world, not climate-controlled towers." The gentle teasing had become part of their new dynamic, acknowledgement of their differences, without the old resentment. "How's Aurora's new enclosure working out?" She approves, which is the only review that matters. Nathan's expression softened. The research team is documenting increased natural behaviors and social interactions. We might be ready to introduce a male next spring. Excellent. That's actually related to why I'm calling. Ian shifted slightly. The journal article on the parasite recovery protocols has been accepted for publication. It'll be authored jointly by our research team and your sanctuary staff, with you and Dr. Winters as lead contributors. Pride mingled with discomfort in Nathan's chest. The idea of academic publication, of his practical experience being validated in scientific circles, was gratifying yet also connected back to Blackthorn, to Nepal, to the circumstances that had nearly destroyed him. "Nathan," Ian prompted, noting his brother's silence. "We did good here. What Blackthorn tried to destroy, we turned into something that will help people and animals worldwide." Nathan looked out his window at the sanctuary, at Aurora in her new enclosure, at the school bus arriving with excited children, at Fiona teaching a new intern about enrichment protocols. His damaged hand ached, a constant reminder of what he had lost. But as he watched a young snow leopard, who had once been too traumatized to eat, now confidently exploring her expanded world, he realized that sometimes the deepest wounds could lead to unexpected healing. "We did," Nathan agreed finally. "But next time you want to collaborate, maybe skip the near-death experience." Ian's laugh carried through the tablet speakers. "Deal. Dinner on Sunday. Mum's old recipe for shepherd's pie." "Only if you're cooking," Nathan replied, knowing his brother remembered how their mother's cooking had brought them together, even in the darkest times of their childhood. "My hand's not up for peeling potatoes. I'll cook, you bring the stories. The kids want to hear about Aurora again." As Nathan ended the call, he caught his reflection in the window glass, the scars on his arm visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve, the slight tremor in his hand permanent now. But beyond his reflection, he could see the sanctuary stretching out before him, transformed like he had been by trauma, but emerging stronger, different, yet somehow more itself than ever before. Life's deepest wounds often become our greatest purpose. Nathan MacLeod's journey reminds us that even in our darkest moments, when pain burrows beneath our skin and threatens everything we've built, redemption waits on the other side of suffering. Sometimes the most meaningful second chances are the ones we give ourselves, and the deepest healing comes not from erasing our scars, but from using them to help others find their way back to wholeness. Olivia Anderson's fingers moved automatically through her morning routine at Pine Valley Music Academy. 20 years of teaching had made these motions second nature. Arranging sheet music, tuning instruments, wiping down the vintage piano keys with special care. Each task a familiar dance in the quiet mountain morning. The old Victorian building that housed the academy creaked gently in the crisp Colorado wind, its wooden floors holding decades of musical memories. The front door burst open, sending the brass bell into a frantic chorus. Daniel Martinez rushed in carrying his 8-year-old daughter Ruby, her small face pressed against his shoulder. 3 hours before their scheduled lesson, something was terribly wrong. "She can't stop coughing," he stammered, his eyes wild with a father's desperation. "Her hands, they're burning." 6 weeks had passed since the first notification about Harmonytech's new, revolutionary instrument cleaning solution had gone home from Pine Valley Elementary. 6 weeks of using the corporate-sponsored product that had somehow made everything worse instead of better. What Olivia discovered when she gently examined Ruby's hands didn't just stop her heart. It would unravel a web of negligence and corporate greed that had been silently harming young musicians across Pine Valley for months. Pine Valley, Colorado wore two faces depending on the season. Winter brought wealthy ski enthusiasts who filled the upscale lodges and artisanal cafes, their money flowing like the mountain streams. But when spring melted the snow, the town returned to its hardworking locals, rescue workers, teachers, and small business owners who endured economic uncertainty between tourist seasons. It was among these year-round residents that Ruby Martinez and her father Daniel made their home in a cozy timber cabin near the Wilderness Rescue Station. At 39, Daniel Martinez carried the weathered look of a man who had seen too much. A former Navy combat medic who had served 3 tours overseas, he now worked as a mountain rescue specialist, combining his medical training with his love for the rugged Colorado peaks. The demanding schedule had become necessary 3 years ago when his wife Isabella succumbed to a mysterious respiratory illness, leaving him the sole provider for their daughter. The strain showed in the premature silver threading his dark hair, and the slight stiffness in his movements from old combat injuries. Ruby was her father's world, a bright-eyed 8-year-old with her mother's warm brown eyes, and a gift for music that made Daniel both proud and wistful. Despite their modest means, Ruby had shown remarkable talent with the violin, practicing for hours in their small living room until Daniel had managed to arrange lessons at Pine Valley Music Academy. The upcoming spring competition wasn't just another performance. It carried the possibility of a scholarship to a prestigious music program that could secure Ruby's future education. "You're just like your mother," Daniel often told her, his voice catching as Ruby played Isabella's old violin. Isabella had been a research scientist before trading her lab coat for motherhood, her passion for protecting children from environmental toxins never quite extinguished. The comparison always made Ruby play with extra determination, her small fingers dancing across the strings with inherited precision. Olivia Anderson had known Isabella Martinez from their days working together at Pine Valley General Hospital. While Isabella had excelled in her toxicology research, Olivia had eventually left nursing, the emotional toll of emergency medicine too heavy to bear. She'd reinvented herself as a music teacher, finding healing in helping children discover their artistic voices. Though she and Isabella had only been casual friends, Olivia had attended the funeral, watching from a distance as Daniel struggled to hold himself together while comforting his confused 5-year-old daughter. Pine Valley was the kind of town where everyone carried pieces of each other's stories. The elementary school principal, Richard Henderson, had taught both Daniel and Isabella decades earlier. Mrs. Powell, Ruby's third-grade teacher, bought organic honey from Daniel's mother before arthritis forced her to close her small apiary. These connections formed an invisible safety net, or so everyone believed. As March winds howled through the mountain passes, the locals prepared for spring's unpredictable weather with practiced efficiency. No one suspected that the real danger to their children wasn't brewing in the darkening skies, but had already taken root in their community, hidden beneath innocent childhood routines and trusted authority figures. The first notification about Harmony-Tech's new cleaning solution came home with Ruby on a Tuesday in early February. A bright blue pamphlet tucked carefully inside her violin case, promising revolutionary care for young musicians' instruments. Daniel found it while helping her pack up after evening practice, scanning the glossy text with growing interest. "Ruby," Daniel called, his voice deliberately casual as his daughter arranged her sheet music for tomorrow's lesson. "Have you noticed any strange smells from your violin lately?" Ruby's small fingers paused on her favorite Mozart piece, her eyes not meeting her father's. "Maybe a little," she admitted. "Marco and Lisa's instruments smell funny too. Mrs. Powell says it's because of the special new cleaner we're supposed to use." Daniel's heart sank. That night, after Ruby's practice session, he carefully examined her violin under the bright kitchen light, his medical training from the Navy making him methodical. When he noticed the first signs of unusual discoloration on Ruby's fingertips where they contacted the strings, he felt an irrational surge of guilt, as though he'd failed some fundamental parental duty. "It's okay, Daddy," Ruby said, sensing his distress. "Lots of kids use it. The school says it's special." The next morning, Daniel stopped at Pine Valley Mountain Supply on his way to drop Ruby at school. The instrument care section offered several options, but the shop owner steered him toward the newest product, Harmony-Tech's Instru Care Plus. "This is what the school's music program is using," the elderly shopkeeper assured him. "One application keeps instruments pristine for weeks." Daniel handed over $45 for the sleek bottle, emblazoned with enhanced formula in bold green letters. That evening, Daniel carefully followed the instructions, applying the solution to Ruby's violin strings and wood. She winced as she tested the instrument. "It makes my fingers tingle, Daddy," she whispered. "Just a few more minutes, Princess," he promised. "We need to make sure your violin is properly cared for." But 1 week later, Ruby was struggling to hold her bow during practice. Daniel noticed angry red marks appearing on her fingertips and palms. Following the package instructions, he applied a second treatment, this time leaving the solution to penetrate deeply, as recommended, despite Ruby's complaints about the burning sensation. "Mrs. Powell says I should wear gloves during music class," Ruby confessed the following Monday, her voice small, "until my hands stop hurting." When Daniel pressed for details, she revealed that 3 of her friends weren't allowed to practice with her anymore. Their parents said they might catch whatever was causing the rash. Daniel's jaw tightened. That night he called the school nurse, who sounded harried and dismissive. "Just keep using the approved product, Mr. Martinez. Sometimes it takes time for young hands to adjust. Make sure you're following the application instructions precisely." Daniel glanced at the pile of medical bills, already overtaking their small kitchen table. Between his rescue work shifts and Ruby's care, he was averaging 4 hours of sleep. The ancient washing machine in their cabin groaned under the constant loads of towels and clothes. Ruby used to wipe her increasingly painful hands. "What about the other children?" he asked. "How many cases are there?" "That's confidential information," the nurse replied briskly. "Just follow the treatment instructions. The school has arranged a special discount on Harmony-Tech products if you need more supplies." By the 3rd week, Ruby's hands were visibly inflamed, and she had developed a persistent cough that seemed to worsen during practice sessions. Daniel found himself thinking of Isabella constantly. She would have known what to do, would have recognized the warning signs sooner. Her research had always focused on chemical exposure in children, though she'd never shared the full extent of her work with him. "Bella," he whispered to their wedding photo late one night after checking on Ruby's fitful sleep, "I don't know how to fix this." The following morning, an official announcement appeared on the school's online portal. Principal Henderson's stern face filled the screen in a video message. Pine Valley Elementary is implementing a comprehensive instrument care program in partnership with Harmony-Tech Industries. All student musicians must use approved cleaning products to maintain the safety and quality of our shared musical equipment. Daniel stared at the screen, a creeping sense of unease settling in his stomach. That evening, when he picked Ruby up from after-school orchestra practice, her eyes were red and swollen. "Daddy," she whispered, clutching her violin case close as she climbed into their old Subaru. "Marco said I'm contaminating the music room, and my chest really hurts when I try to play." At home, Daniel gently took Ruby's violin, his heart stopping at what he found. The wooden surface showed signs of degradation, where the cleaning solution had been applied, and Ruby's sheet music was spotted with tiny droplets of blood from her cracked fingertips. Worse, when she tried to demonstrate her competition piece, she broke into a violent coughing fit that left her gasping for air. That night, Ruby woke screaming from a nightmare. "My hands are burning inside, Daddy. Make it stop." She sobbed as Daniel held her, his own exhaustion forgotten in the face of her distress. He called in sick to his rescue shift, knowing he couldn't leave her alone, knowing too that his supervisor's patience was wearing thin with his absences. As Ruby finally fell back asleep in his arms, Daniel stared out the window at the moonlit mountains. Something wasn't right. The cleaning solution should have been making things better, not worse. Either this was some kind of toxic chemical reaction, or the product itself was fundamentally dangerous. Either way, his daughter was suffering, and the standard solutions were only making things worse. By the 4th week of using Harmony-Tech's product, Daniel noticed a disturbing pattern. The more diligently he applied the cleaning solution, the worse Ruby's symptoms became. One morning, as he carefully bandaged her raw fingertips, Ruby flinched away from his touch. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he whispered, his heart breaking at the angry red patches now spreading across her palms. "It's okay, Daddy," she replied with a brave smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I know you're trying." At drop-off that day, Daniel lingered in the music room doorway, watching as Ruby struggled to hold her bow without wincing. He noticed 3 other children with bandaged hands, all trying to play their instruments while fighting obvious discomfort. "Mrs." Powell approached him with concern etched on her kind face. Mr. Martinez, she said quietly, drawing him into the hallway. I'm worried about Ruby. She can't hold her instrument properly. And yesterday, I found her crying in the practice room. Her hands look, well, they don't look right. I've been following all the recommended cleaning procedures, Daniel said defensively. That afternoon, Daniel requested an emergency meeting with the principal. Richard Henderson was an imposing figure who'd run Pine Valley Elementary with military precision for 15 years. His office walls displayed numerous certificates from educational conferences, including, Daniel noted with growing unease, a prominent plaque from Harmony Tech Industries recognizing the school's commitment to musical excellence. Mr. Martinez, Henderson began, not looking up from his computer. I understand your concern, but we follow district-approved protocols for all equipment maintenance. With all due respect, Daniel countered, my daughter's hands are literally raw from this cleaning solution. She's developing respiratory problems, and she's not the only one. Something's not right. Henderson's expression hardened. Are you using the approved products? The Harmony Tech brand as recommended? Yes, exactly as directed. Daniel hesitated, remembering how he'd tried diluting the solution after seeing Ruby's reaction. I've followed the instructions as closely as possible while trying not to further damage my daughter's hands. The principal slid a glossy pamphlet across his desk. Harmony Tech Industries has released this updated guidance. Note Section 3. Failure to achieve results may indicate improper application or insufficient treatment duration. The science is clear, Mr. Martinez. The products work when used correctly. Furthermore, Henderson continued, as a health and safety measure, children showing continued adverse reactions will need to be temporarily separated from group music activities until the situation is resolved. I'm sure you understand. Daniel left the office with the pamphlet crumpled in his fist and a growing certainty that he was missing something important. That night, after settling Ruby in bed with ice packs for her burning hands, he collapsed at the kitchen table with his laptop. The search results for Harmony Tech cleaning solution reactions yielded thousands of hits, but the top results were all official-looking sites reassuring parents about the product's effectiveness. It took digging through 15 pages of search results before he found a small musicians forum where others described experiences eerily similar to Ruby's chemical burns, breathing problems, school policies insisting on specific brands. One comment particularly caught his attention. After the third application failed, our doctor said these might be chemical burns from unlisted industrial solvents. The company claims it's just natural cleaning agents. Daniel rubbed his exhausted eyes, the screen blurring before him. Isabella would have known what to do. She had always been the one to research chemical exposures, to advocate fiercely when necessary. Without her, he felt adrift, making one wrong decision after another for their daughter. The following morning, his phone rang just as his shift was starting. Ruby's school number flashed on the screen. Mr. Martinez, this is the school nurse. Ruby's having a severe respiratory episode, and her hands are showing signs of secondary infection. She needs to be picked up immediately. Daniel's supervisor scowled as he explained the situation. Third time this month, Martinez. We've got climbers depending on us. My daughter, we all have families. The older man cut him off. Either you're reliable or you're not. The unspoken ultimatum hung in the air as Daniel gathered his rescue gear, feeling his job security fraying like an old climbing rope, strand by strand. At the school, he found Ruby curled in a chair in the nurse's office, wheezing visibly. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered as he carried her to the car. Her hands, wrapped in gauze, clutched her violin case despite the pain. A musician's instinct he recognized from Isabella. The urgent care clinic was crowded with ski season injuries when they finally saw a doctor. "Young doctor," Harris, checking his watch repeatedly, barely looked at Ruby's hands before prescribing an even stronger cleaning solution and antibiotics for the infection. "But the cleaning solution seems to be causing chemical burns," Daniel protested. The doctor was already halfway out the door. "Then you're probably not following the instructions correctly. Make sure to complete the full course of antibiotics." 3 days later, with Ruby still home from school and Daniel's rescue job hanging by a thread, he encountered Olivia Anderson at Pine Valley's small natural food store. He was staring blankly at the herbal remedies section when she approached. "Daniel, Olivia Anderson from the Music Academy. I worked with Isabella at the hospital." Her eyes widened slightly as she took in his disheveled appearance and the dark circles under his eyes. "Is everything okay?" Before he could muster his usual "we're fine" response, Ruby emerged from behind a display, listlessly dragging her feet. Olivia's professional gaze immediately noted the bandaged hands, the wheezing breath, the way the child held herself as if every movement hurt. "The cleaning solution?" Olivia asked quietly. Daniel nodded, suddenly too exhausted to maintain the facade of managing. "Nothing works. The school keeps pushing this one brand, but it's just making her hands worse, and now she can't breathe properly." Olivia knelt to Ruby's level. "Hi there, I remember you when you were very little. Your mom and I used to work together at the hospital." Ruby perked up slightly. "You knew my mom?" "I did. She was very smart about protecting people from dangerous chemicals." Olivia gently touched Ruby's shoulder, careful to avoid her hands. "Would you and your dad like to come to my studio after hours? I've seen this kind of problem before, and I might have some ideas that could help." Daniel hesitated, years of following official medical advice warring with his desperation. "The school insists on the Harmony Tech products." "I know," Olivia interrupted, her voice dropping. "And I wonder why they're so insistent when there are reports of problems." She glanced around before continuing. "Look, I left nursing because I got tired of seeing companies putting profits over patients. Some of these new cleaning solutions can be really harsh, especially with repeated use." For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. Someone believed them. Someone might help. "What do you think, sweetheart?" he asked. "Should we try Miss Olivia's ideas?" Ruby nodded, wincing as the movement triggered another coughing fit. "Mom would want us to try, right?" That simple statement, the invocation of Isabella's practical wisdom, settled it for Daniel. He met Olivia's gaze with newfound resolve. "Tell us what to do." Pine Valley Music Academy had closed for the evening, but warm light spilled onto the snowy sidewalk as Daniel parked his aging Subaru along Main Street. Ruby clutched her violin case, the one possession she refused to clean with the Harmony Tech solution, despite the school's protocols. and regarded the Victorian building with wary curiosity. "It's just us," Olivia reassured them, ushering them through the back entrance. The studio smelled of lemon oil and rosin, rather than the harsh chemicals Daniel had expected. "I've set up in the private teaching room, where I usually work with students who have special needs." The small room contained a comfortable armchair positioned near a humidifier, and on a side table, Olivia had arranged an assortment of natural cleaning supplies that looked nothing like the harsh solutions they'd been using. "First," Olivia said, helping Ruby settle into the chair, "I need to really see what we're dealing with." She donned magnifying glasses with a small light attached and began to gently examine Ruby's hands, her touch so different from the clinical prodding they'd experienced at the urgent care clinic. "When I left nursing," Olivia explained as she worked, "I took specialized training in natural instrument care and rehabilitation therapy. I work with several students with sensitivities and allergies, so I've had to become pretty knowledgeable about alternative cleaning methods." Daniel watched as she meticulously documented Ruby's condition with a small camera. "This isn't just contact irritation," Olivia said finally, removing her glasses and showing Daniel the images. "These are chemical burns, and they're infected. The respiratory symptoms suggest she's having a systemic reaction. No wonder she's been in such pain." These events took place between the ages of 11 and 16, when my family lived in the old Morrison Observatory. As a young child, I was always fascinated by astronomy. At age 8, I was devouring books about cosmic phenomena and watching every documentary about space I could find. The story begins the day after we moved into the observatory's residential wing. The building sat atop Harrison Hill, a lonely elevation overlooking our small town in northern Vermont. Built in 1924, it housed several impressive telescopes, including a massive refracting telescope that protruded from the main dome like a bronze cannon aimed at the stars. My father was the new head astronomer, responsible for maintaining the historic equipment and conducting research. Our living quarters were in the West Wing, a maze of rooms filled with ancient astronomical instruments, star charts, and the quiet whirring of mechanical tracking devices that followed the movement of celestial bodies. It started after watching a documentary about mysterious signals from deep space. That night I woke up at 2:59 in the morning, my room filled with an odd bluish light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. This became a pattern. Every night I would wake at exactly the same time, and for the next hour I would hear whispers echoing through the observatory's curved corridors. The whispers weren't in any language I recognized. They reminded me of the static between radio stations, but with a pattern and intelligence behind them. They would stop precisely at 4 o'clock, as if someone had flipped a switch. During these hours, I would feel something touching my feet through the blankets, like cold fingers gently probing, testing. When I gathered the courage to look at my feet, I could see the impression of something pressing against the blanket, not random movements, but deliberate patterns that reminded me of constellation maps. At this point, I was so frightened that my parents agreed to let me move to a room closer to the main telescope chamber. The change of rooms didn't help. If anything, the phenomena intensified. I felt watched constantly, as if every piece of astronomical equipment had eyes hidden behind their lenses. I began seeing strange lights moving through the corridors, not the warm glow of planets like Mars or Jupiter, but cold, distant lights that reminded me of dying stars. Around age 14, I read in an old astronomy journal that certain telescopes, if pointed at specific astronomical coordinates, could act as receivers for more than just light. The journal suggested that the space between stars wasn't empty at all, but filled with entities that occasionally noticed when we looked their way. The events continued, but changed in nature. The whispering became clearer, though still incomprehensible. Sometimes, while doing my homework late at night, I would hear my name called from the direction of the main telescope. The voice sounded like it was traveling across vast distances, distorted by the same forces that bend light around black holes. The worst incidents happened when I was alone in the observatory. There were times when all the astronomical instruments would begin moving on their own, their gears grinding as they pointed toward something in the sky that wasn't recorded in any of our star charts. The mechanical clock that tracked sidereal time would spin backwards, and through the eyepieces of the telescopes, I would see impossible things, configurations of stars that didn't match any known patterns, shapes moving against the background of space. At 15, during a particularly active meteor shower, I watched through the main telescope as something seemed to look back. The next morning, all the star charts in the library were altered, marked with symbols that hadn't been there before. My father dismissed it as pranks from graduate students, but I knew better. The symbols matched patterns I had seen in my dreams, constellations that only appeared during those hours between 3 and 4. The most terrifying incident occurred when I was 16. I was alone in the observatory during a lunar eclipse. As the moon's light dimmed, all the equipment in the building began to operate simultaneously. Through the main telescope, I saw something emerging from the darkness of space, not a celestial body, but something that seemed to exist in the spaces between stars. It reached through the telescope somehow, manifesting as a cold spot in the air that moved with purpose. When it touched my hand, I felt knowledge pour into my mind, images of distant galaxies, of spaces between dimensions, of beings that had been watching humanity since we first turned our eyes to the stars. I started avoiding everything related to astronomy after that. I took down my space posters, packed away my telescope, and tried to ignore the way certain stars seemed to follow me with their light. But strange things would happen whenever I shared this story. Twice, once when I was 20 and again at 22, I told these events to friends and came home to find all my astronomy books open, their pages covered in those same strange symbols I'd seen years ago. The observatory still stands, though my family moved away long ago. Current staff report equipment moving on its own, strange lights in the corridors, and whispers that seem to come from the spaces between stars. Sometimes, on clear nights, I look up at the sky and wonder if something up there is still watching, still trying to communicate through the language of light and shadow. I've come to believe that some telescopes do more than just observe, they create connections, bridges between our world and whatever exists in the vast darkness between stars. And sometimes, when we look deep into space, something looks back, reaching across the void to touch us with fingers made of starlight and cosmic radiation. The most unsettling part isn't the phenomena themselves, but the way they changed how I see the night sky. Every pinpoint of light could be an eye, every constellation a message, and the space between stars might not be as empty as we think. I still wake up sometimes at 2:59, and for a brief moment, I hear those whispers again, calling from light years away. I was 24 when it happened. My husband Thomas had just left for his annual research expedition to Iceland. 2 weeks studying volcanic activity near Reykjavik. I stayed behind in our newly purchased home in Boston's historic Beacon Hill district, a narrow brick townhouse that had once been Maxwell's Chronometer Works, one of the city's most prestigious clockmaking shops in the 19th century. I shared the space with our English setter, Hercules, and my growing collection of antique timepieces that I restored for specialty collectors. The house still bore the marks of its original purpose, walls lined with built-in display cases, workbenches worn smooth by generations of watchmakers, and the constant, rhythmic ticking of dozens of clocks that filled the air like mechanical heartbeats. I was enrolled in a specialized course on Victorian-era chronometer restoration, studying the intricate mechanisms that had once guided ships across treacherous oceans. The classes ran from 6 to 10 in the evening, which meant most of my nights were spent at my workbench, magnifying glass strapped to my head, peering into the brass souls of ancient timepieces. That Friday was supposed to be routine. My mother offered to take Hercules for the weekend to give me uninterrupted time with a particularly challenging piece. A marine chronometer from 1860 that had spent decades in a shipwreck. I drove him across town to her house in Cambridge, dropped him off with his favorite blanket and what seemed like half his toy collection, then returned to an empty house that suddenly felt too large and too quiet without his clicking nails on the hardwood floors. When I got back, I noticed something odd, a series of small, wet footprints on our front steps, leading up to the door. At first, I thought it might have been the mail carrier, or perhaps a lost tourist. Beacon Hill always had people wandering its historic streets. Nothing was broken, nothing looked forced. I should have called someone, but instead, I wiped away the prints with an old rag and tried to forget about them. That night I made myself tea, settled at my workbench, and started class. Around 8:30, I noticed something strange. All the clocks seemed to tick slightly out of sync, creating an unsettling arrhythmic pattern that made my skin prickle. The house creaked more than usual, groaning like an old ship in high seas. I muted my laptop and listened. There was a soft padding sound on the wooden floors, but it wasn't Hercules's familiar gait. I texted my mother, "I think I hear something downstairs. Probably just these old floorboards, but..." She replied quickly, telling me to check all the locks and call if I felt unsafe. I secured everything: doors, windows, even the tiny bathroom skylight upstairs. The whole time, that strange, arrhythmic ticking continued, like dozens of mechanical hearts beating to different times. At 10, class ended. I shut my laptop, turned off my desk lamp, and sat in the darkness, listening to the house breathe. I called my mother as usual. She told me Hercules had fallen asleep in his favorite spot, under her piano. We were talking about nothing in particular: her garden, a new restaurant, some show she wanted me to watch. when I found myself drawn to my daughter's future room. We were planning to convert the old storage space once Thomas returned, and had already started clearing it out. The door creaked open slowly as I peeked in. The room was dark, illuminated only by the streetlights filtering through the original Waverly glass windows. Her crib stood against the far wall, still in its box, waiting to be assembled. That's when I saw him pressed flat near the floor. A man's face turned toward me, eyes wide and unblinking in the dim light. He didn't move, but neither did I. My voice died in my throat as I heard my mother asking, "Hello, are you still there?" from what seemed like 1,000 miles away. I backed out slowly, closed the door, and whispered into the phone, "Mom, there's someone under where the crib will be." The scream that came through the phone made me jump. She hung up and called my brother, who called 911. I grabbed my restoration tools, the closest things to weapons I had, and fled outside into the cool autumn air. I waited on the sidewalk, shaking so hard my teeth chattered, every tick of my wristwatch feeling like a countdown to disaster. The police arrived with remarkable speed. They swept through the house methodically, finding the back window of my workshop unlocked and slightly open. The screen had been carefully removed, leaning against the wall below. Inside, they found wet footprints across the hardwood floors, leading to various hiding spots throughout the house. One officer, a woman with kind eyes and a stern mouth, pointed out something that made my blood run cold. On several of the antique clocks, they found fingerprints on the glass faces, as if someone had been pressing their hands against them, listening to them tick. Then she showed me something worse. Behind my workbench, they found a small nest of belongings, a blanket, some food wrappers, and most disturbingly, a notebook filled with detailed observations of my daily routine. The officer didn't need to spell it out. He knew your schedule. He knew you were alone. He'd been watching, waiting, learning your patterns. I didn't sleep that night. When I finally brought Hercules home, he acted strangely, growling at empty corners and refusing to enter certain rooms. We had security cameras installed, new locks, motion sensors, but none of it made the house feel safer. Because the truth that no one wants to admit is that locks only work if something wants to stay out. And sometimes they're already inside, listening to your clock's tick, watching your life wind down like a mainspring, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The worst part wasn't finding him under the crib space. It wasn't the wet footprints or the notebook. It was knowing that while I sat at my workbench each night, focused on the tiny gears and springs of my antique timepieces, he had been there, watching, winding himself into the clockwork of my life. Sometimes, late at night, when the clocks tick out of sync, I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for another chance to slip inside someone else's carefully ordered world. I was 5 years old when this happened, standing on the edge of a big change. My father had just bought Madame Winterbottom's Toy Emporium, a 3-story Victorian treasure box that had been selling dolls and dreams to the children of Millbrook since 1876. We were moving from our cozy suburban home into the apartment above the shop, where Madame Winterbottom herself had lived for over 50 years before passing away that spring. I should have been thrilled. What child wouldn't want to live above a toy shop? The whole building was like something from a storybook, with its elaborate wooden trim painted painted in faded purple and gold, tall windows filled with antique dolls, and a brass bell that chimed whenever the door opened. But something about the place made my stomach flutter with butterfly wings of worry. That last night in our old house, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't excitement keeping me awake. It was something else, something I couldn't explain even now, 20 years later. The memory hasn't faded. If anything, it's grown sharper with time, like an old photograph slowly revealing hidden details. I lay awake in my small bed, listening to the house settle around me. My favorite toy sat at the foot of my bed, a Victorian porcelain doll named Isabella. She wore a midnight blue dress with tiny pearl buttons and had eyes that seemed to change color in different lights. I couldn't remember where she came from. She felt like she had always been with me, like a sister made of porcelain and secrets. I was clutching Isabella close when I heard it, a soft, musical tinkling, like a distant music box. It came from the edge of my bed, near my feet. I sat up and whispered, "Hello," thinking maybe my mother had come to check on me. But of course there was no answer, no footsteps, no creak of floorboards. Then from beneath my blanket, I felt it, a gentle tugging. I froze, not even daring to breathe. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the blanket had caught on something. But then it moved again. The shape was wrong. It wasn't the natural pull of fabric or the weight of gravity. It was deliberate, like small hands made of shadow and bone, with too many fingers and nails like tiny glass shards, creeping higher up my leg. I must have squeezed Isabella too tightly, because she made a small tinkling sound, like tiny bells in winter. That's when the pulling stopped. Then, very gently, something reached out and wrapped itself around Isabella's porcelain hand. I didn't move, and it pulled not all at once, but slowly, almost lovingly. It drew her toward the edge of the bed, inch by inch, until she slipped off the side and hit the floor with a soft thud. I heard her being dragged across the hardwood, the sound of her dress rustling like autumn leaves, until she vanished beneath the bed. I didn't sleep. I lay there, staring wide-eyed at my little mermaid nightlight, every nerve in my body electric with fear. Eventually, I must have drifted into some thin, dreamlike state, because when morning came streaming through my window like liquid gold, I sat up with a start. Heart racing, I leaned over the bed to look for Isabella, but she wasn't there. Later, as we packed up and loaded the moving truck, I begged my parents to help me find her. I checked every corner, every box, every shadow. Nothing. My mother brushed it off. My father barely looked up from his paperwork about the shop. And my older brother told me to stop being a baby. But I knew where she had gone. I saw her disappear, pulled away by something that lived in the spaces between floorboards and shadows. Years passed, and by the time I was 12, Isabella had become just another lost toy story, a fuzzy memory of childhood imagination. Until we came back. The toy shop had finally sold, and we returned one last time to clear out the remaining inventory. My parents were outside dealing with the real estate agent. My brother was checking the basement storage, and I was left alone on the main floor. I saved my old bedroom for last. I don't know why, but I did. The door creaked open when I pushed it, revealing an empty room painted in dust and sunlight. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, and the closet door hung slightly askew. I was about to leave when I saw it, there, Exactly where my bed had stood was Isabella. She sat perfectly posed, her midnight blue dress pristine, not a speck of dust on her porcelain skin. I stared at her, confused, and took a few careful steps forward. Her dress looked newer somehow, the pearls gleaming as if they had just been polished. I reached down to pick her up, my fingers trembling slightly. As they brushed against her cold porcelain hand, she turned her head to look at me. Not just the way dolls sometimes seem to move in the corner of your eye. She turned her head, smooth and deliberate, her glass eyes meeting mine. Then she smiled, her porcelain lips curving upward to reveal tiny teeth that hadn't been there before, sharp as splinters of glass. I dropped her and ran from the room, my heart trying to escape through my throat. She hit the floor with a musical tinkling sound, and I swear I heard laughter, high and clear like breaking icicles. My mother found me in the hallway, gasping for air. When she went to investigate, the room was empty. No doll, no laughter, just dust and memories. I never saw Isabella again, but sometimes, when I pass antique toy shops, I catch glimpses of dolls in midnight blue dresses, their eyes following me as I hurry past. And late at night, when the world is quiet, I sometimes hear the distant sound of a music box playing, and I pull my feet up under the covers, away from whatever might be reaching out from under my bed. This happened in December in a town called Silver Ridge, nestled high in the Colorado Rockies. Nothing ever happens here except snow and silence. My name is Ruby, and I used to live in what was once the old mountain railway station, the last stop before the tracks disappeared into wilderness. I was 17, and my room was technically the station master's former quarters, converted decades ago into a living space. If you looked out my frost-etched window, all you saw were endless pine forests and the skeletal remains of the abandoned railway platform, half buried in perpetual snow. The track had been torn up years ago, leaving only the wooden ties like broken teeth in the white expanse. My room was peculiar, technically the second floor, but it felt more like a crow's nest above a frozen sea. The walls leaned inward at odd angles, as if they were slowly collapsing under the weight of countless winters. There was only one window, a tall, narrow thing that never quite sealed properly, letting in whispers of Arctic air that made the heavy curtains dance like ghosts. The floor slanted towards the massive stone fireplace. Nothing stayed level for long. That room made you feel like you were constantly falling, even when standing still. My bed was an ancient brass frame with elaborate Victorian scrollwork, discovered in the station's old storage room. Mom said it had character, her word for anything that was too historic to throw away, but too damaged to be actually nice. I thought it looked like something from a Gothic novel, the kind where young heroines meet terrible fates. I was sick of that place, sick of the isolation, sick of the way the wind howled through the old chimney like it was counting down my days. The night stretched endlessly, heavy with the kind of darkness you only find at high altitudes. I went to bed late one night, just after midnight. I'd been restless all day, my skin practically crawling with an undefined anxiety I couldn't name. I burrowed under 4 layers of blankets, the handmade quilt from my grandmother, the thick wool blanket that still smelled of cedar, my father's old army surplus sleeping bag, and a fleece throw covered in half-finished sketches of mountains. I tried to nestle deep into this nest, as if the weight could keep the unease at bay. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the constant cracking of trees outside as their sap froze and expanded. I kept waking up freezing, no matter how many times I pulled the blankets back up. They always ended up around my knees. I told myself I must be kicking them off in my sleep, even laughed at my own restlessness. It must have been around 2:30 when I woke again. The room felt different, not just cold but wrong. I opened my eyes to see frost forming on the inside of my window, my breath hanging in the air like smoke signals. I didn't move right away, just stared at the ceiling's exposed beams, listening. Not for any specific sound, just waiting for something to break the unnatural silence. I remember trying to convince myself that I should probably grab the blankets again so I could go back to sleep. When I reached down, half awake, to grab them, they didn't move. They were caught on something, maybe the bed frame. I tugged again, and it felt like something pulled back. My blood turned to ice water. That's not just a phrase. I swear I could feel it freezing in my veins. Every part of me stopped working, my hands still clutching the corner of the quilt, unable to let go. My eyes moved slowly, reluctantly, toward the edge of the mattress. There was a face there, a pale, slack thing, not fully visible, just the upper half emerging from beneath my bed. The eyes were wide and bloodshot, staring up at me with an intensity that burned. It wasn't breathing hard, wasn't moving at all, just staring. A hand gripped the other end of my quilt, fingers long and white as icicles. I remember the silence, the absolute, crushing quiet, not even the wind daring to speak. I thought to myself, if I scream, he'll move, and if he moves, I'll die. I didn't run for the door, though it was only steps away. Maybe because I knew I wouldn't make it. Or maybe because some primitive part of my brain knew that movement would trigger something worse. Instead, I went for the window. In one desperate motion, I threw all the blankets at the face and lunged for the frosted glass. It screeched as I shoved it open, the sound like breaking ice. My fingers slipped on the frozen metal, and I remember the sound of it, like the window was screaming with me as I dove. I hit the sloped roof over the station's entrance, rolled, and landed in a deep snowbank. My ankle twisted as I landed, and I heard something crack, but I didn't stop. I crawled and stumbled through knee-deep snow to the caretaker's cabin, where old Mr. Henderson opened his door with a rifle in hand. I collapsed into his entryway, sobbing and shivering. He called the police, while his wife wrapped me in warm blankets and pressed hot tea into my trembling hands. They searched the station, found my window still open to the howling winter, and discovered the blankets on the floor. But they found something else too: footprints in the frost on my floorboards, leading to a patch of wall where the old radiator pipes ran between floors. And there, behind the loose panel, they found a small nest filled with things I thought I'd lost over the past months. Hair ties, sketching pencils, even my favorite wool sock. He'd been there before, maybe not every night, perhaps not always under the bed, but he'd been watching, waiting. The worst part, they never caught him. No fingerprints, no footprints in the snow outside, nothing. It was like he vanished into the winter night that had spawned him. We moved away that spring, down to lower altitude where the air was thicker and the nights less absolute. But I think that's the worst part, knowing he's still out there, maybe back in that old station, waiting under another girl's bed, watching with those frozen eyes while the mountain winter rages eternal outside. I was 7 years old when this happened, still young enough to believe in mermaids, but old enough to know that some monsters don't live in fairy tales. The memory remains as clear as salt air, and to this day, I'm not sure if what I experienced was a dream or something that crawled out of the depths and left seaweed trails across our floors. We lived in the old Porter Point Lighthouse, a towering structure of weathered stone and iron that had guided ships through treacherous waters since 1847. My father was the caretaker, responsible for maintaining the historical building that had been converted into a museum on the lower levels and our home in the upper sections. The lighthouse stood alone on a rocky peninsula, connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway that disappeared during high tide. That night it was well past midnight. Everyone else in the lighthouse was asleep, my parents in their room below, my older sister in her tower bedroom. But I was awake as usual. Sleep never came easily to me as a child. My mind was always too full of stories about sea creatures and shipwrecks, inspired by the maritime books that filled our home. I was reading my favorite book, Tales of the Northern Seas by flashlight. The beam caught the brass fittings on my bedroom walls, making them glint like underwater treasure. The lighthouse's beam swept past my window every 30 seconds, creating a rhythm that usually comforted me. But the air in the room began to change. It started with a chill, as if someone had opened a window to the ocean air. But all the windows were sealed against the autumn storm that had been raging outside. The temperature dropped so suddenly that I could see my breath forming tiny clouds in the flashlight beam. My book slipped from my fingers and disappeared into the narrow space between my bed and the curved wall. I frowned. I had just gotten to the part about the ghost ship of Port Andrews. I leaned over and reached into the darkness to retrieve the book. My fingers brushed against the leather cover, and then something pulled back. The sensation was gentle at first, like seaweed wrapping around your ankle in shallow water. I tugged harder, it tugged back. I froze. My first thought wasn't fear, it was curiosity. I tried again, more urgently now, and whatever it was yanked hard. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My mouth opened, but the cold had sunk into my chest, stealing my voice. I stared into the shadows beneath my bed, my heart pounding against my ribs like waves against the lighthouse walls. And then I saw it, a hand, just for a moment. But it wasn't a human hand. It was grayish-green, webbed between the fingers, and ended in curved claws that looked like polished abalone shells. In an instant, it vanished back under the bed, taking my book with it. I didn't move. I couldn't even blink. All I could think about were the stories my father had told me about the lighthouse's history, tales of mysterious disappearances, of keepers who claimed to hear singing on stormy nights, of strange scratching sounds coming from the walls during high tide. The electric reading lamp on my bedside table flickered, and I heard it, a low, wet sound, like water moving through gills. Something shifted beneath the bed, and I felt the mattress dip slightly, as if something heavy was pressing against the frame from below. I turned my eyes toward my bedroom door, thinking about running to my parents, but the distance seemed impossible to cross. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even breathe too loudly. I lay there, paralyzed, staring at the ceiling as the lighthouse beam swept past my window again and again. I watched the way the shadows moved, looking for any sign of webbed hands reaching out from the darkness. When dawn finally came, I gathered my courage and looked under the bed. My book was gone, but I found something else, a trail of what looked like phosphorescent seaweed, glowing faintly in the morning light. It led from under my bed to the wall, where centuries of water damage had created cracks in the stone. By the time I called my parents, the seaweed had dried to nothing more than dark stains on the wooden floor. Years later, I found an old logbook in the lighthouse archives. An entry from 1879 caught my eye. Something dwells in these walls. It takes small things at first: books, toys, tools. The children speak of webbed hands and glowing eyes. We tell ourselves it's their imagination, but during storms, we hear it moving through the lighthouse's bones, singing songs no human throat could make. I never told my parents what really happened. I don't know why. Maybe because I thought they wouldn't believe me. Or maybe because part of me wanted to keep the mystery alive. For years afterward, I refused to read in bed. I built a small fortress of pillows in the corner of my room, as far from the walls as possible, and told myself I was safer there. The lighthouse still stands, though my family moved away long ago. Sometimes, when I visit the coast, I look out at the old tower and wonder if it's still there. That thing with webbed hands and abalone claws, collecting stories from children brave or foolish enough to read past midnight. They say the current caretaker's daughter recently reported missing books, and on stormy nights, visitors claim they can hear something that sounds like singing coming from within the lighthouse walls. I was 9 years old when it happened, spending the night in my grandparents' library. It was a sweltering summer evening, the kind where the air feels thick enough to drink. The ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, its shadows dancing across leather-bound books that lined the walls from floor to ceiling. My grandparents were in their study down the hall, half watching some historical documentary, while I played my own game among the towering shelves. Their house was an old New England colonial, filled with antique furniture and the kind of history you could smell in the wood. The library had always been my favorite room, with its rolling ladders and reading nooks tucked between massive oak bookcases. That night, I was playing an imagination game of my own creation, wrapped in one of my grandmother's old quilts, pretending I was an explorer in an ancient tomb. Part of my game involved hiding under the massive mahogany desk that dominated the center of the room. It was a beautiful piece, carved with intricate patterns of leaves and vines, passed down through generations of my family. I loved the feeling of being underneath things, wrapped up safe like nothing could find me if I couldn't see it. The quilt was tucked around me just so, and I lay there, staring up at the wooden underside of the desk, where generations of my ancestors had sat and worked. I reached up with both hands, pressing against the smooth wood, straightening the quilt so it wouldn't catch on the carved drawer bottoms. That's when I heard it, a growl. Not the playful sound a dog makes, not even a warning bark. It was deep and guttural, like thunder rolling through wet earth. Before I could move, something slashed through the quilt twice, fast and precise. I saw it happen, 2 sets of claws, massive and black, one on each side of my hands, ripping through the fabric mere inches from my skin. I screamed. The quilt twisted around me as I rolled out from under the desk, tumbling across the Persian carpet. I was crying before I even stood up, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. My grandparents rushed in, my grandmother turning on all the lights, while my grandfather demanded to know what had happened. Through tears, I pointed beneath the desk, trying to explain about the monster, the huge black dog-like thing that had tried to grab me. They exchanged a look I'll never forget, not of disbelief or amusement, but of something deeper, more worried. My grandfather said quietly, "We don't have a dog," and suggested that maybe I had caught the quilt on a rough spot under the desk, or perhaps a loose nail had snagged it. But I knew what I had seen. I kept crying, insisting there was something under there, something dark that had growled at me. Finally, just to prove me wrong, they moved to check under the desk. There was nothing there, just the intricate oriental carpet and the soft gleam of well-polished wood. My grandmother wrapped me in her arms, while my grandfather examined the quilt. The slashes were there, clean and precise, like something had cut through the fabric with razor-sharp claws. He ran his fingers along the tiers, his expression unreadable. Later that night, I overheard them talking in hushed voices about the family guardian and the old stories, but they never explained what they meant. For context, we thoroughly searched that room. The doors had been closed the whole time, the windows locked against the summer heat. We found nothing, no animal, no explanation for what had happened. For weeks afterward, I wouldn't go near the desk alone. I began sleeping with my bedside lamp on, refusing to let my feet dangle over the edge of my bed. Even now, 20 years later, I still think about it sometimes. I've read through my family's old journals, trying to find mentions of similar encounters. There are whispers, hints in the margins of centuries-old diaries about a presence in the library, a guardian of some sort that appears to children of the family. Some accounts describe it as a massive black hound, others as something more abstract, a shadow with teeth and claws. My grandfather passed away last year, and in his will he left me the desk and a letter. "The library has always had its protector," he wrote. "Sometimes it tests us, sometimes it guards us. The slashes in your grandmother's quilt weren't meant to harm. They were a warning. Something was in the house that night, something worse than what you saw under the desk. The guardian was keeping you hidden, keeping you safe. I have the desk in my own study now. Sometimes, late at night, I hear scratching from underneath, like claws on wood. I don't look anymore. Some family traditions, some guardians, are better left to their own devices. But I still wrap myself in blankets when I read, and I never, ever let my feet dangle over the edge of my chair." This happened to my mother in the winter of 1998, years before I was born. She was 22 then, working the night shift at the Harbor Light Diner in Port Haven, Maine, a fishing town where the smell of salt and seafood clung to everything like a second skin. Back then, Port Haven was quieter, populated mostly by weathered fishermen in oil-stained jackets and deckhands who carried the ocean in their boots. The diner sat right on the waterfront, its neon sign reflecting off the dark waters, where fishing boats bobbed like ghost ships in the harbor mist. Mom knew most of the regulars by name, hard-working men who smelled of fish and diesel. paid in wrinkled bills and always tipped generously. But there was one customer who started showing up during her late shifts, Marcus Aldridge. He worked on the Northern Star, one of the deep-sea trawlers that would disappear for weeks at a time. He was tall, unnaturally pale, as if he'd never seen sunlight, and always looked slightly damp, even when it wasn't raining. She'd seen him at the local grocery store, always lingering in the aisles, watching her through gaps in the shelving. He started coming to the diner around midnight, sitting at the counter's far end. He rarely ordered more than coffee, just staring at her reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser. He'd ask questions between sips where she lived, what time she finished work, if she walked home alone. She'd deflect politely, moving on to other customers, but he never seemed to take the hint. That night, her shift ended at 2 in the morning. The streets were empty, except for the occasional stray cat and the sound of foghorns echoing across the bay. The street lights cast orange pools on the wet cobblestones, and the mist rolling in from the ocean made everything look soft and unreal. Mom didn't drive back, then few people in town did. Everything was within walking distance, including the old Victorian house she shared with 3 other young women who worked various jobs around the harbor. The house itself was a creaky 3-story affair with salt-weathered shingles and a wraparound porch that groaned in high winds. She never heard footsteps behind her that night. The fog muffled everything except the distant clang of buoy bells and the soft lapping of waves against the seawall. Her housemates were already asleep when she arrived, their rooms dark and quiet. She moved through the house silently, boots off at the door, wanting nothing more than to shower off the smell of fried fish and coffee. After her shower, still damp and barefoot, she walked down the hallway to her room. That's when she noticed something wrong. Her bedroom door was open. She always kept it closed, always. Even her housemates knew this. But there it was, cracked open just enough for the darkness to spill out into the hallway. She told herself it must have been the wind from an open window. Or maybe one of the girls had borrowed something. Still, something felt wrong. Her skin prickled with goosebumps that had nothing to do with being wet from the shower. Once inside her room, she closed the door and sat on the edge of her bed. Something felt off. She couldn't explain it. Her body knew before her mind caught up. Without knowing why, she leaned over slowly and looked under the bed. There he was, Marcus, curled up like a pale spider, his eyes wide open and fixed on her. He wasn't breathing visibly, wasn't blinking, just staring with an intensity that made her blood freeze. She didn't scream or panic. She stood up calmly, walked down the hall, and knocked on Katie's door. When her housemate opened it, groggy and confused, Mom said quietly, "I think there's someone under my bed." That woke Katie up fast. She grabbed the baseball bat she kept by her door, a habit from playing softball in college. The other girls, Anna and Meredith, came out when they heard the commotion. They all went to Mom's room together, but Marcus was no longer under the bed. They found him halfway through her window, trying to escape silently into the fog. He'd been hiding, waiting, for God knows how long. He ran, surprisingly fast for someone who looked so awkward on land. They called the police, who picked him up the next morning, still wearing his wet clothes. The cops knew him. He had a history of similar behavior in other coastal towns. But all he got was a fine, and an order to leave Port Haven. Mom says the worst part wasn't finding him under her bed. It wasn't the eerie silence or the way he looked at her like she was a fish he'd caught in his net. It was knowing he had been in the house before. The girls had heard strange noises the week before, but dismissed them as the house settling or the wind off the ocean. She still wonders what would have happened if she hadn't looked under the bed that night, if she'd turned off the light and gone to sleep, if she'd brought someone home with her, if she hadn't noticed that slightly open door. These days she lives inland, far from the ocean and the smell of fish. She won't sleep without checking under the bed, won't leave a window unlocked, and says she can still feel his stare when the fog rolls in at night. I think the hardest part was how it changed her. She used to love the ocean, but now she can't even walk along the beach without looking over her shoulder, searching for pale figures in the mist. This happened during my research expedition to northern Norway, where I was studying rare Arctic flora for my master's thesis. I had this romantic notion of fjords, northern lights, and solitary contemplation among ancient forests. I was 23, armed with nothing but my botany degree and an excessive amount of optimism. I had been traveling through remote villages, staying in local homes, documenting plant species that thrived in the harsh climate. My journey led me to Ravndal, a settlement so small it barely appeared on maps. The village wasn't even a proper village, just a scatter of wooden houses clinging to the edge of a deep fjord, surrounded by pine forests that seemed to absorb all sound except the mournful cry of ravens. The local train station was nothing more than a wooden platform and a rusted sign, half hidden beneath creeping moss. No proper building, no ticket office, just an ancient bench that looked like it might collapse if you breathed on it too hard. The evening was already settling in, though it was barely 4 in the afternoon, and the first snow of the season was falling in lazy spirals. I waited for over an hour, my fingers numbing despite my thermal gloves, my breath creating ghost-like shapes in the frigid air. That's when I noticed her, an elderly woman standing at the tree line, wearing layers of hand-knitted sweaters and a traditional Norwegian bunad that seemed too formal for the setting. She moved toward me with deliberate slowness, her boots leaving unusually deep prints in the fresh snow. In heavily accented English, she asked if I was waiting for the night train to Trondheim. When I nodded, she informed me there would be no trains until morning, something about track maintenance further north. She offered me shelter for the night, saying her home was warm and she would feed me traditional Norwegian stew. I hesitated, but the temperature was dropping rapidly, and my research had taught me that local hospitality was often the only lifeline in these remote regions. We walked for what felt like hours, along a snow-covered path that wound deeper into the forest. The pines grew denser, their branches hanging low under the weight of snow, creating tunnels of darkness broken only by occasional glimpses of the gray sky above. My guide moved with agonizing slowness, yet somehow maintained a steady pace that had me struggling to keep up. Finally, we reached her house, a 2-story timber building that looked abandoned at first glance. The windows were glazed with frost, and the shutters hung at odd angles, creaking softly in the wind. Inside, she lit old oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the walls, and heated a pot of what she called lapskaus, It was only when she sat across from me in the yellow lamplight that I noticed something was terribly wrong. Her face seemed wrong somehow, like a mask that had been carefully but imperfectly crafted. Her hands, when they emerged from her sweater sleeves, were massive and rough, with thick fingers that looked more suited to woodcutting than knitting. When her eyes met mine, they held the cold calculation of a predator sizing up its prey. She said I would sleep upstairs, and I followed her up narrow stairs that groaned under our weight. The room was tiny, with a single bed and a window that had been nailed shut. No other furniture, just a rusty hook on the wall. She closed the door behind me, and I heard the distinct click of a lock. I called out, but received only silence in response. Trying to calm my racing heart, I set down my backpack and began searching for anything that might help me. Needing to use the bathroom, I dropped to my hands and knees, hoping to find a chamber pot under the bed. Instead, my fingers brushed against something soft fabric, then cold flesh. I froze. Slowly, I lowered my head to look under the bed, and my eyes adjusted to reveal a young woman, pale and motionless, her eyes staring sightlessly at nothing. Her clothing marked her as a backpacker, probably another researcher or tourist who had trusted the wrong person. Fighting back panic, I pulled her body out and placed it on the bed, covering it with the blanket. Then I crawled under the bed myself and waited, my heart pounding so hard I feared it would give me away. Minutes stretched like hours until I heard footsteps, slow and purposeful, approaching the door. The lock clicked, the door creaked open, and I saw heavy boots enter the room. They stood at the foot of the bed for a long moment. Then I heard it, the wet sound of metal meeting flesh, again and again. Blood dripped through the gaps in the mattress, some of it landing on my face. Then silence, broken only by the sound of a heavy object, an axe being dropped inches from where I lay. After the boots retreated, I waited until I could no longer hear footsteps. Using the axe, I began working on the window frame, prying it loose millimeter by excruciating millimeter. When it finally gave way, I threw my pack out and jumped, landing hard in the deep snow. I ran through the forest, blind with terror, until I saw headlights, a logging truck on a main road. The driver, a burly man with kind eyes, didn't ask questions when I begged him to take me to the nearest police station. I never reported what happened. In that remote region, with no evidence except my story, who would believe me? Who would find that house again in the vastness of the Norwegian forest? I still wonder about the woman I found. Was she a scientist like me? Or perhaps a tourist seeking adventure in the northern wilderness? Had she too trusted a seemingly kind offer of shelter? I'll never know. But I do know this. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who wear human faces and offer warm beds on cold nights. When I was 12, my family relocated to a weathered mansion on the Scottish coast. The house loomed over the gray waters of the North Sea, its Victorian towers rising like ancient sentinels against the perpetually overcast sky. According to the estate agent, the house was built in 1892, though the foundations seemed far older, as if they had grown from the very cliffs themselves. The exterior walls were built from dark granite that seemed to absorb what little sunlight managed to pierce the constant fog. My father, an architect specializing in historical restorations, saw it as his masterpiece to be. "Just wait," he would say, his eyes gleaming with excitement as he detailed his plans for renovation. He replaced the cracked windows, reinforced the sagging roof, and spent weeks rebuilding the grand staircase that wound up through the heart of the house like a wooden serpent. By the time we moved in, the house looked almost habitable, but something still felt wrong. My bedroom was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a corridor so narrow my shoulders nearly brushed both walls. The floorboards weren't just warped. They seemed to shift beneath my feet, as if the wood itself was trying to guide my steps somewhere I didn't want to go. The room itself was vast, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows, no matter how many lamps we added. The walls carried the scent of decay, like autumn leaves rotting beneath winter snow. But it was the closet that drew my attention, a towering Victorian piece built directly into the wall, with intricate carvings of twisted vines and thorny roses. Inside, mounted at the back, was a small door no larger than a cat flap, sealed shut with rusted hinges. Across from the closet, set into the wall like a wound, was an arched doorway leading to the attic. It had no proper lock, just a simple latch that would sometimes lift on its own during particularly strong storms. The first time I explored the attic, I found more than just the expected dust and cobwebs. Tucked behind a stack of moldering newspapers dated 1923, I discovered something that still haunts my dreams. 7 porcelain doll heads arranged in a perfect circle. Their faces were pristine, untouched by time, but their necks ended in jagged breaks, as if something had methodically torn them from their bodies. The porcelain wasn't yellowed or aged. It looked fresh, almost wet, as if they had been placed there recently. I told my mother, but she dismissed it as leftover props from some long-forgotten child's game. But those heads weren't old. The paint was still tacky when I touched it, leaving a smear of rosy pink on my fingertip. By the end of our first year, I had grown accustomed to feeling watched. It started subtly, the sensation of eyes following me as I brushed my teeth, the feeling of someone standing just behind me while I changed clothes. I tried to blame it on the wind or the old pipes, but it grew worse. One night, while I lay on my stomach watching a documentary about deep-sea creatures, my hair fell forward, curtaining my face. That's when I felt it, a finger, cold and slightly wet, touched the base of my skull. It was deliberate, almost curious, like someone testing the ripeness of fruit. I felt the nail, slightly curved and sharp, drag across my skin before pulling away. I didn't scream, I couldn't. I ran downstairs, still clutching my bag of crisps, to find my mother in the kitchen. Through tears, I tried to explain. She came upstairs, said a prayer in my room like she had done in our old house when we found bats in the attic. But this wasn't something that could be driven away with words. For months afterward, I slept in the center of my bed, convinced that nothing could reach me if I stayed away from the edges. I left the closet door open, knowing that a closed door only meant I couldn't see what was behind it. I draped scarves over the attic doorknob, telling myself I would hear if it moved. But it got worse. One evening, while watching an old episode of Doctor Who, laughing at something I can't remember now, my entire bed suddenly lifted. It didn't shake like it would in an earthquake. It was yanked upward, as if something underneath had tried to flip it like a coin. I scrambled off, gasping, clutching my chest like I could physically hold my heart inside. I told my mother again, and she prayed again, but nothing changed. A week later, I was alone in my room, the remote control sitting just out of reach on my duvet. I stretched to grab it, and that's when I heard it, a hiss, low and wet, like steam escaping from a cracked pipe, but deeper, almost guttural. I froze, arm extended, fingers trembling. When I reached again, another hiss erupted, louder, angrier. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I ran again, nearly tumbling down the stairs. My mother found me in the kitchen, shaking. She didn't even ask this time. She just led me to the couch and began to pray. My father, who had been in his study reviewing blueprints, suggested it might be the old heating system playing tricks. But this wasn't the pipes, and I knew it. Years later, my mother finally told me something that made my blood run cold. One morning after I had left for school, she went to tidy my room. Through the window, she saw a figure in our walled garden, a young girl, perhaps 8 or 9, wearing what appeared to be a white nightgown from another century. She was walking in perfect circles, humming a tune my mother couldn't quite hear. When my mother rushed downstairs and into the garden, she found it empty. No footprints in the dew-soaked grass. No sound except the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. My father told her not to tell me, that I was already scared enough. He was the one who invented the story about the heating system. But I knew I had always known. Something lived in that house long before we arrived. Something that played with dolls and walked in circles. Something that liked to touch living things with dead fingers. To this day, I can't sleep near the edge of any bed. I keep all doors open, and I've developed a habit of humming loudly when I'm alone in a room. Because sometimes, if you listen too carefully to the silence, you might hear something humming back. Fresh out of art school with a photography degree and dreams bigger than my bank account, I found myself standing in front of the Marlowe Hotel, a towering Victorian-era building that had been converted into apartments sometime in the 1920s. The rent was surprisingly affordable, which should have been my first warning sign. My unit was 403, tucked away at the end of a maze-like corridor, where the antique wallpaper peeled at the corners and old photographs hung crooked on the walls. The building had that classic horror movie charm, creaking floorboards, impossibly high ceilings, and a temperamental elevator that wheezed and groaned like it was on its last breath. It was late October, and the nights were getting darker earlier, but the autumn warmth still lingered enough to keep the windows open. I was in the middle of arranging my photography equipment when I realized I hadn't checked my mailbox yet. The building's main entrance had a modern security system that locked automatically, but my apartment door, warped from decades of seasonal changes, needed to be locked manually with an old brass key. "I'll just be a minute," I muttered to myself, phone pressed between my ear and shoulder, as I chatted with Ricky about his latest disaster date at the bar where he worked. I grabbed my key and headed down to the lobby. Standing at the bank of brass mailboxes, I was laughing at Ricky's story while sorting through the usual mix of local restaurant flyers and credit card offers. Everything felt perfectly normal, mundane even. I came back inside, pushed my heavy apartment door shut behind me, and kicked off my shoes. Dropping onto my bed, I continued opening mail one-handed while still holding my phone. Then I dropped it. The phone slipped from my fingers, bounced once on the hardwood floor, and slid just under the bed. "Hold on," I told Ricky, leaning down to retrieve it. My fingers found nothing but dust, so I lowered my head to see where it had gone. That's when I saw him, a face in the shadows, pale and gaunt, with dark hollows where his eyes should have been. He was curled up against the wall near the radiator pipes, knees drawn to his chest, watching me. I could see his chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. I didn't scream. Some primal instinct kept me quiet as I straightened up, my heart threatening to burst through my ribs. With a calmness I didn't feel, I said, "Hey, Ricky, I need to take a quick shower. I'll call you back." Standing on legs that felt like jelly, I walked the 5 steps to my bathroom, closed the door, and locked it. I turned the shower on full blast, then looked at the small window with its decorative but useless iron grating. Thank God for ground floor apartments. I pulled myself through the narrow opening, leaving the shower running, and landed in the overgrown courtyard behind the building. My bare feet touched wet grass as I sprinted across the street, crouching behind a parked car as I called 911. My voice cracked as I explained the situation. "Stay where you are," the dispatcher instructed. "We're sending units now." I called Ricky next. He was already on his way, having sensed something wrong in my voice. I kept my eyes fixed on my bathroom window, where steam was now billowing out into the cold night air. Then I saw it, a shadow moving behind the curtain, pacing back and forth. Ricky arrived just as the first police car pulled up, lights silent, but spinning red and blue across the old brick facade. I handed them my key, and 3 officers entered while another stayed with me and Ricky. When they emerged, they were escorting a man between them. He didn't resist, just walked with an unnatural stiffness, his eyes unfocused and distant. His hair was long and matted, his clothes stained and torn, and he was painfully thin, like someone who hadn't eaten a proper meal in months. As they led him past me, his eyes suddenly snapped into focus, meeting mine. His lips curved into a smile that made my blood run cold. The officer beside me gripped my shoulder gently and said, "He was standing outside your bathroom door with a kitchen knife. Your shower probably saved your life." I broke down then, the delayed terror finally hitting me. Later, the police explained that the man was Gerald Pratt, a former maintenance worker who had been fired from the building 5 years ago for erratic behavior. He had been living in the building's forgotten spaces, watching residents, learning their routines. They found evidence that he had been entering apartments while people were out, sleeping in their beds, eating their food. Mrs. Hudson, the building manager, told me he had likely slipped in while I was checking the mail, my door failing to latch properly. He had been watching me from various hiding spots as I moved around unpacking, waiting for the right moment. That night, Ricky stayed with me in a hotel room because I couldn't bear to go back to the apartment. For weeks afterward, I jumped at every shadow, checked every corner of every room I entered. Even now, years later, I never leave a door unlocked, and I always check under the bed. Some say ignorance is bliss, but I know better. Sometimes the monsters we fear really are hiding in the dark, waiting for us to let our guard down. And sometimes they wear human faces and carry kitchen knives. Thank you for spending this time with Brad Arrows. We hope the stories whispered through the rain carried you far into your imagination or your dreams. If you're still awake, let us know how you liked the journey. Until next time, stay safe, sleep well, and let the darkness comfort you.